Chapter 367. That was a hand. However, it did not look like a human hand. The black dog could tell at a glance, but to be on the safe side, or perhaps it wanted to make a comparison, it lowered its head and glanced at Lu Chen's palm. One was a hand of flesh and blood, with rosy, lustrous skin and full of vitality, while the other was not. The palm that suddenly appeared on the edge of the cliff path was gray, cold, hard, and solid. It looked like a rock, but compared to a real rock, there seemed to be something strange about this hand. Life. The rock-like palm abruptly tightened its grip, just like how Lu Chen had done all he could to climb up from the bottom of the cliff. Then, even more gray appeared. Several sharp thorns grew out of the slender arm, and there were also black web membranes growing on the underside of his ribs. Soon, a strange and ear-piercing scream came from the bottom of the cliff. It was like a bloodthirsty monster slowly revealing its fangs. Atsu stared at the hand, and the hair on its neck slowly stood up. Then, it suddenly let out a low roar, as if it was facing a formidable enemy. Lu Chen was startled. Then, as if he felt something, he suddenly turned around and saw the scene that Atsu saw just now. Then, under their astonished gazes, the gray shadow in that place swayed, and a head that was smaller than what they had expected was raised from under the rock. At first glance, it looked like an evil spirit. It was a ferocious and ugly head, with sharp fangs protruding from its bloody mouth. Its bell-like eyes were exceptionally large, and the skin on its face was as hard as stone. Even the roar of this monster sounded like a pile of rocks squeezed together and rubbed against each other. When this strange and terrifying monster appeared, it immediately stared at Lu Chen and Atsu, then opened its mouth and roared at them. Following this fierce roar, a pair of black membranous wings suddenly spread out behind it. There were countless thorns on the wings, and there were several sharp claws on the edge of the wings. The sharp claws even reflected a white light. Lu Chen's face darkened. He didn't recognize this monster. He hadn't even heard of it before, let alone seen it. He suspected that this strange monster, which looked like a giant stone bat, only existed in the Great Snow Mountain. Otherwise, it would be impossible for there to be no records of it in the world for thousands of years. But it was meaningless to think about these things now, because the monster had already soared into the air, flapped its huge membranous wings, and then pounced on him. At that moment, the sky seemed to darken a little. The monster opened its mouth and bared its fangs. It was so aggressive that it looked like it wanted to eat meat and drink blood. In any case, it didn't look like it wanted to make friends. Lu Chen had no choice at all. He stood up abruptly and waved his hand. At the same time, a black dagger suddenly appeared in his hand. Black flames ignited and condensed into a half-foot-long flame that stabbed towards the monster that was pouncing towards him. Almost immediately, Lu Chen used his greatest power. This was because he knew nothing about this kind of monster, and because he suddenly felt a trace of danger from the depths of his heart. The monster that looked like a giant bat pounced over, and its sharp claws were in front of him in the blink of an eye. Lu Chen dodged to the side, but the black dagger in his hand didn't stop. It continued to pierce forward and directly stab the only soft membrane of the monster. This time, Lu Chen felt as if he had stabbed an incomparably hard rock. He could even see sparks flying out from the friction between the sharp blade and the rock. His arm violently shook. The incomparably sharp blade, the killing weapon that had killed many people and pierced through many flesh, was forcibly blocked just like that. But at the same time, the black flames in front of the black dagger seemed to be unaffected by the monster's hard skin and directly penetrated it, burning into the membrane. In a moment, under the incomparably hard skin, a terrifying blood bag bulged, and the strange blood inside seemed to boil and burn in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. Then, with a boom, it exploded. Blood splattered everywhere, and the color of the blood was impressively black. The monster's head suddenly rose, and it let out an incomparably mournful scream. Its wings desperately flapped, and then it seemed to flap its wings to fly up. However, the membrane that was pierced by Lu Chen's black dagger was obviously flapping very hard, and it seemed to be seriously injured. Lu Chun leaned against the rock, clinging to the mountain wall, holding the dagger in his hand, and stared coldly at the monster in the air above the cliff, not far away. Beside him, Hatsu also pounced over, roaring loudly at the monster in the air, and also fiercely bared its fangs. The ferocity in the monster's eyes didn't fade at all. Instead, it looked at the two living creatures below even more viciously, but there was still a touch of fear in its eyes. So after a moment, it suddenly flapped its wings and flew back for a distance. Then it let out a shrill cry towards the dark, bottomless abyss below. Squeak! The shrill cry instantly spread, echoing in this narrow and long canyon between the mountains and also in the dark crevice. Lu Chen's heart tightened, and his expression changed slightly. Just as he was about to move, he suddenly heard a burst of strange sounds from the depths of the dark crevice under his feet. After a moment, the world seemed to suddenly turn dark, and the sound of something flapping in the air suddenly sounded. One after another, black shadows pounced out from the depths of the darkness. 1, 2, 3, a dozen, dozens, and even more similar monsters flapped their huge membranous wings and flew out from the depths of the ground, flocking here from all directions. Lu Chen's heart sank, and Atsu's cry was also interrupted. However, in the roar, not long after, they were surrounded by a large black mass of monsters from top to bottom, from front to back. And further away in their line of sight, there seemed to be more monsters rushing over. That scene was like the end of the underworld. Every pair of eyes revealed greed and desire for flesh and blood, and every monster looked extremely bloodthirsty. No one knew which one was the first to lose its patience, but with a shrill cry, it swooped down from mid-air. Lu Chun, who had cold sweat on his forehead, swung his sword. The monster seemed to know that the dagger was extremely dangerous. It screamed and flapped its wings to avoid it, but its sharp claws scratched the stone wall above Lu Chen's head, instantly tearing the mountain rocks, leaving a few slender cracks, and small stones fell one after another. This action seemed to have suddenly opened a prelude to the siege. All the monsters screamed desperately, crowded in midair, and were about to pounce on Lu Chun. At this critical moment, Lu Chun could no longer care about anything else. He clenched his teeth and directly jumped onto Atsu's back. Then, on this narrow mountain path, on this precipice, Lu Chun did not even look at Atsu. He didn't even look at Atu, only growling in a low voice, "Charge! Roar!" Atu let out a furious roar and sprinted forward. And all the monsters in midair seemed to be completely enraged at this moment. Countless strange screams were deafening. Countless sharp claws and terrifying membranous wings swarmed over, biting and biting from every direction. From afar, it looked like a terrifying black ball that kept squirming in the darkness, running rapidly on the precipice path. Chapter 368. Countless membrane-winged bats were hovering in the air, crowded together. They seemed to be crowded, but strangely, they never collided with each other, always passing each other by a hair's breadth. Accompanied by countless terrifying and ear-piercing screeches, the demon beasts with bloodthirsty red eyes swooped down ceaselessly. They stretched out their sharp claws and flapped their wings as they desperately clawed at Atu and Lu Chun. They were like a pack of hungry wolves about to tear apart fresh food. However, this food was not dead yet, nor was it frightened by this terrifying scene. Lu Chun no longer looked at the incomparably dangerous precipice under his feet. It was as if he had placed his life completely in Atu's hands. He clenched the black dagger in his hand, struggling to parry and resist the monsters that kept attacking from above, below, left, and right. In just a short moment, Lu Chun had discovered that these membrane-winged bat monsters, which he had never heard of before, were extremely powerful. Almost all of his own means did not have much effect on them. Only the power of the black fire seemed to be the natural enemy of these monsters. It could repeatedly disrupt their formation in the chaos, and once it came into contact with the skin and flesh of these monsters, it could immediately burn in and seriously injure them. Not long after, These bloodthirsty and crazy monsters seemed to have understood. They began to fear the black dagger in Lu Chen's hand, especially the black flame that rose from the dagger from time to time. Often, when Lu Chen stabbed with the dagger, the membrane-winged bat monsters in front of him would scream and flap their wings to fly away. In this way, Lu Chen could no longer hurt these monsters as easily as he did at the beginning, but with this layer of fear, these membrane-winged bats did not dare to easily attack. But from the beginning to the end, none of these strange and terrible monsters left. They were still circling around Lu Chen and Atsu, chasing them in the air, screaming and looking for any opportunity to suddenly rush down to attack. At the same time, Atsu seemed to have completely forgotten everything around it. Just like Lu Chen suddenly no longer cared about the things under his feet and gave his life to this big black dog that could not speak, Atsu also no longer looked up. Those terrible monsters, sharp roars, bloodthirsty eyes, and sharp claws that could tear its body apart, all turned a blind eye to them. The black dog just barked and howled, then ran forward wildly. The cliff path was extremely dangerous, and many places were abnormally narrow. Some sections had even been broken after the accident last night. However, Atsu still rushed forward all the way without looking back. Its body, its movements were so agile that it was stunning. Like a flash of lightning, or like the most agile ape in the forest, it kept jumping and running in this natural barrier as if it was running on flat ground. It was only because the surrounding membrane-winged bats were all flying monsters that they could keep up with it. Otherwise, they would have been left behind by Atsu a long time ago. It seemed to trust the man on its back wholeheartedly, ignoring all the other demonic beasts and trusting that Lu Chen would be able to protect it. The man and the dog suddenly had such a tacit understanding in the face of life and death. However, the situation was still dangerous. The membrane-winged bats were powerful, numerous, and extremely fast. If it were other beasts, they would have long become food in their stomachs or lost their footing and fell off the cliff. It could be said to be a miracle that Lu Chen and Atsu were able to hold on until now. But in such a situation, those countless membrane-winged bats still showed no signs of giving up, under their incessant harassment and attacks. Atsu seemed to be able to hold on as he ran with all his heart, but Lu Chen's complexion gradually turned ashen and unsightly after continuously resisting the numerous demon beast attacks without a moment's pause. The spiritual power in his body began to dry up. The dark flame on his black dagger was getting fainter and fainter, and the flame was getting shorter and shorter. As he gradually showed signs of weakness, the surrounding membrane-winged bats suddenly became excited. Their shrill cries became louder and louder, and their blood-red eyes seemed to glow. Their attacks suddenly became even more frenzied, as if these demonic beasts were actually quite intelligent. The Great Snow Mountain, after all, still had an irresistible danger that was almost irresistible. The black ball formed by the membrane-winged bats was getting closer and closer, and the shrieking demon beasts were getting closer and closer with every pounce. The crushed stone walls were sent flying, and the debris kept falling, as if foreshadowing the arrival of the final desperate situation. At this increasingly critical moment, suddenly, Lu Chen heard Atsu under him suddenly let out a long howl, which was not quite the same as its previous barking, and even contained a hint of surprise. He tried his best to stab with his dagger, avoiding a membrane-winged bat that had just rushed over. Taking advantage of the short moment of respite, he suddenly looked back, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw that a piece of flat ground suddenly appeared in front of him. This unusually long and dangerous canyon had finally come to an end. The snow-covered ground looked as dazzling as a piece of white jade. Lu Chen's spirit was greatly boosted. Although he did not know how to get rid of these terrible membrane-winged bats for the time being, it was always a good thing to have a change. Otherwise, he, who was almost at the end of his strength, really did not have the confidence to last long on this dangerous precipice trail. Rush over, Lu Chen roared to Atsu. However, almost at the same time, those membrane-winged bats seemed to have felt something, and their offensive suddenly increased, screaming and pouncing madly, several times more ferocious than before. Suddenly, Lu Chun was left and right, and he almost couldn't hold on any longer. Sure enough, after a moment, there was a low hiss, and Lu Chun let out a muffled groan. His body shook violently, but after persisting for a long time, his movements were finally a beat slower. Soon, the slight decline immediately brought serious consequences. A huge membrane-winged bat waved its sharp claws and pounced over. The claws swept past Lu Chen's shoulder, and in an instant blood appeared. The skin was torn open, and a large piece of flesh was forcibly torn off, blood splattering everywhere. Lu Chen took a deep breath, and his face turned pale. Perhaps it was because they saw and smelled the smell of blood. All the membrane-winged bats around instantly became excited and pounced down together, screaming wildly. The scene was like a black ball suddenly collapsing, concave, towards the center. At this moment of life and death, Atsu also seemed to feel the danger. With a fierce howl, it suddenly jumped up in the midst of running, rushing over the canyon in a dangerous gap, and fell heavily on the snowy ground. It also temporarily escaped the attack of those membrane-winged bats. There was a series of strange rumbling sounds behind him, and at that moment, countless membrane-winged bats could not stop their momentum and crashed into the stone wall. For a time, strange whistling sounds rose one after another, and in the blink of an eye, there were countless more scars on the mountain wall. But it didn't take long for those membrane-winged bats to flap their wings and fly again. Under the gaze of Lu Chun and Atsu, they seemed to be not bound by the canyon at all, or perhaps the smell of blood on Lu Chen's shoulder had made them dizzy, and they desperately wanted to kill and eat these two living creatures. At that moment, a black shadow seemed to cover the sky and the earth, shrouding the snowy ground. Lu Chun and Atsu fell on the snowy ground, and a black shadow covered their eyes. But before they could react, a huge figure suddenly rushed out from behind a mountain wall next to them and directly crashed into the seemingly terrifying flock of membrane-winged bats. Kacha! It was an ear-piercing sound that carried a trace of terror and cruelty. All the membrane-winged bats seemed to freeze in an instant, and a bloody mouth suddenly appeared in mid-air, biting down from the air and directly biting 3 membrane-winged bats in its mouth. The sharp teeth closed, and the giant turned around. Black blood flowed out from the gaps between the terrifying giant teeth like water and slowly dripped down from the mouth of the giant beast. Then, there was a chewing sound coming from the huge shadow, making their hands and feet turn cold. The residual shadow coldly and slowly turned to look at them. The black shadow was like a mountain, completely enveloping them. Chapter 369. The numerous membrane-winged bats, which were still arrogant and majestic just a moment ago, suddenly disappeared. Even if these ferocious demon beasts saw with their own eyes that their companions were suddenly bitten and bleeding by the giant mouth, none of the membrane-winged bats showed any signs of revenge. All the membrane-winged bats seemed to have suddenly turned into stone and were frozen in the air. Those sharp, ear-piercing, bloodthirsty howls also suddenly fell silent at this moment. For a moment, Lu Chun and Atsu, who had fallen on the snow, did not make a sound, nor did the numerous membrane-winged bats in the air. Only the mountain-like majestic black shadow, with its huge mouth, gave off a shuddering and terrifying chewing sound. Crunch, crunch. It was the sound of fangs and bones rubbing against each other. Blood flowed and slowly dripped down. The next moment, all the membrane-winged bats seemed to have woken up from a dream. In an instant, strange cries rang out. They seemed to have suddenly woken up and fluttered their wings to fly into the sky in horror. They seemed to desperately want to leave this place, to get away from the huge black shadow. The further the better. A giant claw descended from the sky, and with a sharp whistling sound, it directly smashed into the group of membrane-winged bats. In an instant, there was a burst of chaotic banging sounds mixed with screams. Another 7 or 8 unlucky membrane wing bats were smashed by this giant claw, and as if struck by lightning, they fell from the sky one after another. Lu Chun and Atsu saw it clearly from the side. They saw that the membrane wing bats that fell had broken bones and tendons. Before they fell to the ground, they could see that their bodies were strangely twisted. After falling to the ground, after struggling a few times on the snow, they all became stiff and motionless. It seemed that they had already died. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the remaining membrane wing bats desperately flapped their wings and flew far away, as if they were fleeing for their lives. One by one, they rushed back to the canyon and dove into the bottomless, dark crevice at the fastest speed, disappearing in the blink of an eye. It was quiet outside the canyon. There was only an unusually tall figure standing in the snow, with its back facing them. At this moment, even Lu Chun and Atsu did not dare to move rashly, for fear that they would suddenly alarm or anger this terrifying monster. At this moment, Lu Chun suddenly felt a chill on his face. He reached out to touch his cheek and found that it was slightly wet. He then looked up and saw that between the blue sky and the snow-capped mountains, there were faint and tiny specks of white floating down. A gust of wind blew from afar, bringing with it a slight chill. It began to snow again. The snow was not heavy, and the wind was very light. It was probably just the beginning. For Lu Chun and Atsu, who were lying on the snowy ground, none of this was important at the moment. Their attention was focused on the gigantic monster in front of them. Lu Chun was a little nervous. For such a monster that could easily scare away those membrane wing bats, and even treat them as food, the strength of Lu Chun and Atsu could not resist it at all. The only thing they could do was probably to see if they could find a chance to escape. Just as he was thinking about how to find a chance to escape, Atsu, who was originally lying beside him, suddenly stood up. Lu Chun was taken aback and quickly reached out to pull Atsu. He had not seen the true face of the monster in front of him, but there was no doubt that the monster was powerful and terrifying. He was a little worried that Atsu was too frightened and would react excessively. If he provoked the monster in advance, he was afraid that it would immediately be a disaster. However, it seemed that Atsu just stood up. The appearance of this black dog also looked a little strange. It seemed to be a little confused, but also a little excited. It stared at the huge shadow, and even its breathing became a lot heavier. Although he was a little surprised by Atsu's performance, seeing that Atsu did not make any drastic moves for the time being, Lu Chun was still relieved. Only then did he turn his attention back to the giant monster. After the membrane wing bats fled, the giant monster that suddenly appeared turned its head and looked in the direction of the dark crack in the canyon. It did not have any intention to chase after them. After a while, it turned its head, then took 2 steps forward and came to the corpses of the membrane wing bats that were shot down on the snow. It lowered its head and began to chew. It was also at this moment that Lu Chun finally saw the appearance of the giant monster. He was shocked. The giant monster that appeared in front of him was impressively a giant wolf with an unusually large body. In that canyon, there once appeared a giant wolf with the corpses of humans in its mouth. This paragraph suddenly came to Lu Chen's mind. That was what Hui Yin said to him back then, and it was also the biggest basis for them to determine that there might be a secret path to the northern human territory here. Lu Chen had never seen such a huge monster wolf in his life. Even after Atsu had advanced, it was far inferior to this giant wolf. At best, the body of Atsu was only 1/5 the size of this giant wolf. Its fur was grayish-white, and it had sharp teeth. At this moment, this giant wolf did not seem to notice that there were 2 living creatures in the snow. It just lowered its head and gnawed on the membrane wing bats that it had shot down. It ate happily, and the sound of crunching that made people's scalp tingle was endless. Seeing the appearance of this giant wolf monster beast, a glimmer of hope suddenly appeared in Lu Chen's heart. He slowly stood up from the snow and then pulled Atsu, preparing to take this opportunity to try and sneak away quietly. Unexpectedly, Atsu did not move at all, and it did not have the obedience that it usually had towards him. This black dog just stared at the giant wolf. Not only did it not leave, but it even took a step towards the giant wolf. Lu Chen was taken aback and quickly reached out to grab the fur on Atsu's back, not letting it go any further. But just these few actions, coupled with Atsu's subconscious struggle, suddenly seemed to have alarmed the giant wolf monster over there. It suddenly raised its head and looked in the direction of Lu Chen and Atsu. It was a pair of deep green giant eyes with a cold aura that seemed to be unique to the great snowy mountain. It instantly enveloped Lu Chen and Atsu. A chill made the two of them shiver uncontrollably. For a moment, Lu Chen wanted to grab Atsu and run away, but in the end, he forcibly endured it. How to put it, in the face of such a monster, the hope of escaping was really not big. On the contrary, it was better not to further provoke it for the time being. After all, this giant wolf monster did not directly attack them like it did those membrane-winged bats. Although this monster was too terrifying and difficult to predict, it was better to keep quiet. But Atsu seemed to be particularly strange today, different from the past. Under such heavy pressure, not only did it not retreat, but after hesitating for a while, it actually walked toward the monster again. And this time, Atsu did not even stop and actually walked straight towards it. Lu Chen was stunned. He reached out to grab it, but he could not. At such a dangerous and shocking juncture, he could only watch Atsu walk past. Slowly, with a hint of a test, and at the same time, under the cold gaze of the giant beast, Atsu slowly walked to the feet of the giant wolf. Its body was a little trembling, as if it was still a little afraid, but there was still a stronger force driving it. The giant wolf looked at this little thing coldly, and did not seem to have any intention of making a move. Watching from a distance, Lu Chen, who had no time to stop it, was suddenly shocked. He only felt that Atsu and the giant wolf monster were vaguely similar. Chapter 370. Atsu used to be a stray dog. It met Lu Chen and Exin in the land of chaos and was adopted. Since then, it had been by Lu Chen's side. Exin had always liked it, but for some reason, Atsu was determined to follow Lu Chen, which made Exin very sad. After living together for so many years, they had almost never been separated. Lu Chen naturally knew Atsu's situation like the back of his hand. From the time it was a puppy until it grew into a big dog, Atsu had always been a rustic dog. That was how it got its name. It could be considered a joke that Lu Chen had made fun of it in the past. However, after the Battle of Kunlun Mountain, Atsu, with a combination of all kinds of opportunities, stimulated the ancient bloodline in its body and obtained the opportunity to advance. When Lu Chen saw Atsu again, this puppy had undergone a great change in appearance. It had become more like a powerful black wolf monster. Yes, now, although Lu Chen usually called Atsu as a stupid dog, and so on, even when he was joking, Atsu was already a wolf. At this moment, there was a similarly terrifying and inconceivable giant wolf demonic beast in front of it. Lu Chen even felt that although there was a big difference in size between Atsu and this giant wolf monster, Atsu looked very much like this giant wolf, as if this giant wolf had shrunk by 4 or 5 times. Obviously, Lu Chen was not the only one who felt this way. The two wolves, one big and one small, also seemed to have noticed something. Atsu looked very nervous, and Lu Chen could even see its body trembling slightly on the snowy ground. But in Atsu's heart, there seemed to be another particularly strong emotion driving it all the way to the front of the giant wolf demon beast. It raised its head and looked up at the giant wolf. The giant wolf looked down at it indifferently. After a while, Atsu suddenly let out a howl. It sounded like a wolf's howl, and it reverberated through the mountains. Lu Chen didn't know what Atsu meant by this howl, but he still subconsciously became nervous. This was because he saw that after Atsu mustered up the courage to howl, the giant wolf demon beast finally responded. It suddenly raised one of its front claws. It was the giant claw that had killed 7 or 8 ferocious membrane-winged bats in an instant, and then it slammed down towards Atsu. The wind on the snow-capped mountain seemed to have suddenly turned cold, so cold that it froze one's blood. Lu Chun only felt his scalp go numb, and his heart suddenly jumped. But soon, he found something unusual. The giant wolf demon beast's claws were not fast. For a giant beast like it could even be said to be gentle. Lu Chun abruptly stopped his steps and stared at the giant beast in front of him. It was at this moment, following the movement of the giant wolf demon beast, Lu Chun suddenly discovered some details that he hadn't noticed before. This giant wolf demon beast was undoubtedly terrifying and powerful, but at this moment, Lu Chun discovered that there were wounds on the giant wolf's body. The wounds were very deep, and the injuries were very serious. There were even more than one wound. Although this giant wolf demon beast didn't seem to care about the injuries on its body, Lu Chun quickly thought of the big fight that he had experienced not long ago. To be precise, it was last night in that canyon, where he was forced to hide in the seed tree hole. Just as Lu Chun's expression changed slightly, the wolf's claws in the air had already fallen and landed on the top of Atsu's head. Atsu lowered its head and body, seemingly making a submissive posture. The giant wolf's claws did not show the terrifying power that it had before to directly kill it. Instead, after a slight pause, it actually gently touched the top of Atsu's head twice. A low and heavy voice suddenly echoed in this snow-capped mountain. "You are my son." The mountains were silent, and the snow seemed to be a little stronger. There was no one else here except for Lu Chun. There were only two wolves in front of him. But this heavy voice also clearly echoed in Lu Chun's ears, causing him to be a little confused for a moment. But very soon, he came to his senses and looked at the giant wolf demon beast with a stunned expression. After Atsu heard this, he became visibly excited. He barked a few times at the giant wolf monstrous beast. His body kept twisting, and from time to time, he would rub his head against the giant wolf monstrous beast, expressing his obvious affection. Looking at the strange behavior of Atsu, Lu Chun instantly thought of the reason for this matter. When he first saw Atsu, he judged that this little demon beast might have an extraordinary origin, and it was even likely to be a descendant of the legendary snow wolf demon beast of the Great Snowy Mountain. The snow wolf, also known as the Heavenly Wolf, was one of the most powerful and terrifying demon beasts in the ancient times, and had unimaginable power. But for some reason unknown to the human race, this powerful demon beast had never appeared in the world in the history of the human race, but its legend had always existed. Looking at the giant wolf demon beast in front of him, Lu Chun took a deep breath. No wonder it could fight head-on with the King of Darkness in the underground abyss. They were indeed powerful creatures that defied the natural order. As for Atsu, since it was a descendant of the Heavenly Wolf and had wandered to the chaotic lands, Lu Chun did not know about it. But according to the legend, the Heavenly Wolf was a loner and did not care about having children. Perhaps even the Heavenly Wolf itself did not know about the existence of Atsu. In short, Atsu seemed to be extremely excited. When the Heavenly Wolf saw one of its children suddenly appear in front of it, it seemed to be in a good mood. After a while, it turned its gaze to look at Lu Chun. Lu Chun's heart skipped a beat, but before he or the Heavenly Wolf could react, Atsu had already jumped in between them, stopped Lu Chun, and barked at the Heavenly Wolf. After listening for a while, the Heavenly Wolf's originally cold gaze softened. It retracted its gaze, opened and closed its mouth, and a deep and heavy voice once again came from its mouth. "Since you said so, I'll spare his life. Human, go down the mountain yourself." Lu Chun was shocked, and his heart was at a loss for a moment. But he knew that this was probably the best outcome for him. But at this moment, Atsu suddenly jumped up again, barked repeatedly, and ran back to Lu Chun's side. The Heavenly Wolf's voice suddenly carried a trace of anger, and said, "You are a descendant of the Heavenly Wolf. Why are you following a human?" After a pause, it said again, "Stay in this great snow mountain and stay by my side for a few years. I will naturally teach you various skills so that you can achieve something in the future." However, Atsu just shook its head, and its expression was extremely firm. The intimacy it had when it first saw the Heavenly Wolf had disappeared at this moment. Lu Chun was surprised and a little touched. For a moment, he did not know what to say, but he looked at the heavenly wolf with some worry, afraid that it would get angry. However, the heavenly wolf just stared at Atsu, and after a long while, it shook its head, seemingly a little helpless, and said in a low voice, "Sure enough, our heavenly wolf bloodline is..." It did not continue speaking, but took a step and walked towards Lu Chun. The figure, which was as tall as a mountain, walked in front of Lu Chun in a few strides, and a terrible and terrifying pressure instantly shrouded Lu Chun, and the huge wolf's head also slowly lowered and fell in front of Lu Chun. Its sharp and huge fangs were very close to him, and he could even see his own reflection in the terrifying wolf's eyes. But after taking a deep breath, Lu Chun still clenched his teeth and did not retreat. Lu Chun looked straight at the heavenly wolf, and after looking at it for a while, the heavenly wolf suddenly said, "It wants to go with you." Lu Chun nodded and said, "I know, I'm very happy." The heavenly wolf snorted coldly, looked at him, and said, "There are countless dangers in front of the great snow mountain. Even if you pass the abyss canyon, you can't get out." Lu Chun was silent for a moment and said, "Since we have come this far, we still have to try to know." The heavenly wolf said indifferently, "I can help you pass, even if it is for my son, but you are not, so you have to promise to do something for me." Lu Chun's spirit was lifted, and he said, "What is it?" The heavenly wolf said, "Have you heard a person called Taihu?" Chapter 371. Taihu. Lu Chun was shocked. He was not unfamiliar with this name, as he had heard of it before. In fact, in the vast land of the Divine Continent, at least in the cultivation world, there were not many cultivators who did not know of this name. He was one of the 6 divine transformation stage perfected lords of the Alliance of True Immortals, the famous and influential perfected Lord Ironpot. Who didn't know him? However, after a moment of silence, Lu Chun said, "There are hundreds of millions of people in the Divine Continent. There are countless people with the same name. If we only rely on this name, I'm afraid I can't determine which one is the person you're looking for." Tian Lang nodded, but his expression remained the same. He said, "That person's cultivation is extremely high. He was able to enter the Great Snow Mountain and meet me. In terms of cultivation level, he is already at the peak of the human race. So, can you find that person?" Lu Chun exhaled softly, then nodded with a slightly serious expression. Since Sirius had already said it to this extent, it couldn't be anyone else. It had to be that Supreme Taihu from the True Immortal Alliance. However, he did not expect that in the deepest part of the chaotic land, in the Great Snow Mountain, which was known as one of the most dangerous places in the world, Taihu Lord would actually be related to the ancient beast here. For some reason, Lu Chun faintly felt that this matter was not normal. However, he could not think of too many things at the moment. He could only say to Tian Lang, "If that's the case, I already know who that person is. What do you want me to do? Please tell me." Tian Lang did not speak immediately. Instead, he stared at Lu Chun. After a moment, he said, You guys follow me first." After that, he turned around and walked towards the north. Lu Chun and Atsu looked at each other and followed. It was just that the Great Snowy Mountain was extremely steep, and since ancient times, there had been no signs of human habitation, so there were no roads to speak of. Although Lu Chun could see that the ancient celestial wolf had slowed down, he still couldn't catch up. However, at this moment, the benefits of raising a dog for 1,000 days could be seen. Atsu very consciously came over and barked at Lu Chun. It looked as if it was disgusted. Then, Lu Chun could only laugh dryly and climb onto Atsu's back. Then, Atsu started to run. It was at this moment that Lu Chun finally understood why this fellow could run in a place like the Great Snow Mountain as if it was running on flat ground. It seemed like it had inherited some of its father's powerful ancient bloodline. In the midst of this, Tian Lang turned around to take a look. When it saw Atsu carrying Lu Chun on its back, it paused for a moment as if it was unhappy. However, when it saw Atsu's cheerful and honest look, it did not show any signs of being forced. In the end, Tian Lang could only silently shake its head and continue to run forward. With Atsu as a means of transportation, their speed instantly increased by several folds. Later on, even Sirius quickened his pace. Two wolves, one big and one small, sprinted through the great snowy mountain range. Even though the snow falling from the sky gradually became heavier, it could not stop their strong and fast bodies that were as fast as lightning. There were dangers everywhere in the Great Snow Mountain, but they were safe and sound along the way. Naturally, this was not because Lu Chun and the others were too lucky. The main reason was basically the existence of Tian Lang, which was more ferocious and more powerful than all the hidden beasts around them. After running for a long time, passing countless peaks, braving the wind and snow, they finally came to the foot of a big mountain. Lu Chun soon found a huge cave at the foot of the mountain. Tian Lang led him and Atsu into the cave. A cave that could accommodate the hill-like body of Tian Lang was naturally huge for Lu Chun. Before he entered the cave, he was already prepared in his heart. He thought that this kind of fierce beast's lair would most likely have piles of bones piled up like a mountain. The terrifying scene would make one's scalp numb. As for the stench, it was needless to say. Who knew that after he entered the cave, he was shocked. This huge lair of Tian Lang was unusually clean and tidy. There was no trace of the piles of bones that he imagined, and there was nothing terrifying to be afraid of. Well, except for the giant beast itself. After staying in the cave for a long time, Lu Chun suddenly realized that he didn't smell the stench that most wild beasts had in their caves. This huge cavern was actually just a huge cavern, and there were no other small paths. After Sirius arrived, he laid down in the middle of the cavern and signaled for Lu Chun to rest in a corner of the cavern. Then he called Atsu over. What Tian Lang said to Atsu, Lu Chun did not hear at all. Perhaps there was a special way of communication between wolves, or perhaps Tian Lang was too powerful. Lu Chun did not know if Tian Lang cast a spell to hinder his hearing. In short, Lu Chun did not hear anything for the whole day. He just watched Atsu stay beside Tian Lang, quietly listening to something. There were a few times when Tian Lang stretched out a front paw to gently touch Atsu's head and body. When Lu Chun saw that action, he felt that it really seemed like a kind of action between father and son. After the initial indifference, as the communication increased, Tian Lang seemed to begin to become closer to Atsu. After a night like this, the snow outside became heavier and heavier. Later, it finally became a snowstorm that existed in the Great Snow Mountain. However, in this lair of Tian Lang, the snow seemed to be a very distant thing for Lu Chun. Lu Chun spent a very peaceful night here. At some point in the middle of the night, Lu Chun suddenly woke up from his deep sleep. Then, he saw a strange rainbow light appear in what should have been a pitch-black cave. Atsu lay quietly beside Sirius, while Sirius stared at him, one of its front paws resting on Atsu's head. The dazzling rainbow light was emitted from the forehead where they touched, then turned into a dreamy radiance, surrounding Atsu's entire body in the light. From Lu Chun's point of view, Atsu's entire body seemed to be glowing, as if something in its body had been awakened. It began to bloom and emit power. From a distance, he could even hear the bones in Atsu's body creaking and shaking nonstop. For some reason, although Lu Chun could not see what Tian Lang was doing to Atsu, for no reason, a few words such as rebirth and change the meridians and marrow suddenly emerged in his mind. He lay in the darkness and quietly watched this strange scene. Then, at some point, he quietly fell asleep again. When he opened his eyes at dawn, he saw Atsu. He did not know when the black dog had returned to his side. Perhaps it was because they had been relying on each other for so many years that it had become a habit. Atsu still habitually nestled his head against his body. His body was very warm. Lu Chun smiled and reached out to pat its head. Tian Lang let them stay in this cave for 3 days. During this period, Tian Lang would perform that strange trick on Atsu every night. As for the effect, Lu Chun could not tell for the time being. At least, Atsu did not seem to have changed significantly. On the 4th day, Tian Lang finally seemed to be a little tired and let them leave. This time, Tian Lang directly led the two of them out of the Great Snowy Mountain and arrived at the border between the Great Snowy Mountain and the Land of Chaos. It was also here that Lu Chun finally heard what Tian Lang told him. Go find a person called Iron Pot and tell him, Tian Lang said to Lu Chun, it's time to return the leaf that he borrowed back then. Chapter 372. Do you know what leaf is? After descending from the Great Snow Mountain, Lu Chun watched as the ancient giant beast turned around and disappeared into the vast snowy mountains, leaving only Tu and Lu Chun standing at the foot of the mountain. Lu Chun asked Tu. Atsu shook its head, indicating that it knew nothing about it. Lu Chun felt a little helpless, so he turned around and walked forward. Atsu followed beside him. The snowstorm around them was getting weaker and weaker. The white faded away and the greenery gradually flourished. Unknowingly, they seemed to have walked into another world. Recalling the past, recalling the inexplicable days spent in the southern wilderness, Lu Chun could only sigh and sigh with emotion. However, when the flourishing scenes of life reappeared before his eyes, the lush greenery and vibrant flora and fauna that were rarely seen in the southern wilderness, even though they were still in the dangerous depths of the Land of Chaos, Lu Chun still felt a sense of joy as though he was a wanderer who had returned home. For many years, he had never felt such a feeling, but at this time, he unexpectedly experienced it. Perhaps no matter what, as a human, he could not give up the yearning in his heart. No matter how good the southern Xinjiang wilderness was, it could not keep his heart. This time, the place they came out from was, of course, not the place that Lu Chun and Atsu had come to a few years ago. Back then, they were forced to jump into the Longchuan River and were finally washed to the southern Xinjiang wilderness by the river water. This time, it was mostly thanks to Atsu's cheap giant beast father. In any case, Lu Chun felt that Sirius probably did not want a rare descendant to die in the Land of Chaos. Therefore, after Sirius brought them out of the Great Snowy Mountain, they arrived at a place that they had never been to or heard of before. It looked like a green grassland with many hills and was full of vitality. However, the monsters that lived here were obviously more gentle. There were rarely any ferocious and terrifying monsters that gave people headaches. Occasionally, one or two aggressive monsters would appear, but Lu Chun and Atsu managed to deal with them one by one. Perhaps this was a shortcut? However, as he walked through this unknown grassland, Lu Chun soon discovered something unusual about Atsu. The most obvious thing was that the big dog's appetite had once again skyrocketed. Atsu was desperately eating, and it only ate the flesh and blood of demonic beasts. Ordinary beasts, and even weaker demonic beasts were obviously not worthy of its attention. Lu Chun observed along the way. It seemed that the more powerful and vigorous the demonic beasts were, the more interested this big black dog was. Every day, Atsu was in a state of hunger. It always wanted to eat more, and as it ate crazily, the black dog became fiercer and fiercer. Atsu was getting stronger and stronger. Lu Chun clearly felt this. He saw with his own eyes that a large number of monsters on this grassland, from weak to strong, from small to large, were slowly entering the menu of Atsu, and then in turn, stimulating Atsu to become stronger. The strength of this dog was growing by leaps and bounds. Lu Chun had never seen any kind of monster that could have such a terrifying growth. Perhaps this was the power of the ancient bloodline. Then, Lu Chun quickly thought of the strange things that he secretly saw Sirius doing to Atsu during those nights in the den of Sirius, and the dazzling and swaying rainbow light around Atsu. Would this dog grow into a giant beast like Sirius in the future? Lu Chun couldn't help but think so. This terrifying rate of growth continued for 7 days. It wasn't until the two of them had walked across the wide grassland that Atu's seemingly bottomless appetite finally began to slow down. It then told Lu Chun the reason why it had become docile. It was probably because it had eaten too much recently, so it was temporarily on an empty stomach and stopped hunting those unlucky demon beasts for no good reason. Lu Chun looked back at the road they came from. Around the road that passed through the vibrant grassland, there were probably countless monsters that had fallen. Atsu was 2 times fatter than when it first came down from the snowy mountain. Now, it was already a real, huge black wolf. Just by standing, Atsu's body had already exceeded Lu Chen's head. As it walked, it exuded an awe-inspiring aura. That magnificent aura made it look like the king of the grassland. But it was no wonder. Along the way, almost all the big and small demonic beasts on the prairie had been harmed by Atu and Lu Chen. Even if there were some particularly powerful ones that Atu couldn't defeat for the time being, they were often defeated by Lu Chen, who was helping the tyrant with all kinds of cunning tricks and became Atu's tonic. Then, on the 7th day, they walked to the other side of the grassland. Immediately, they saw a large river appear in their field of vision. The Dragon River. At last they saw the river again. The Dragon River was the dividing line between the most dangerous inner region and the central region of the Land of Chaos. As long as they crossed this river and continued north, they would most likely encounter humans like Lu Chen once they reached the central region of the Land of Chaos. Of course, the people they met might not necessarily be their friends. However, Lu Chen was still very happy and his mood quickly improved. As he stood by the riverbank and observed the situation of the Dragon River, he even had the mood to ask Atsu, who was standing beside him, "You're finally back. After crossing the river, do you have a destination in mind?" This time, Atsu reacted quickly. It barked at Lu Chen and drew a few lines on the ground with its paw. At first, Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh. He scolded Atu, "I don't really understand what you're saying. I was wondering when you would be able to cultivate to the level of that serious and imitate our human language. Of course, it would not be easy to reach the level of Sky Wolf's ability to speak human language. In fact, it was very likely that this ability could only be achieved by reaching the peak of the demon beasts. Naturally, Atsu was still far from it. However, when Lu Chen's gaze swept across the lines that Atsu had drawn on the ground, he found it funny at first. However, his smile suddenly froze as if he had seen something under Atsu's paw. After a while, Atsu retracted its front paw and took a few steps back. Lu Chen slowly walked over and squatted on the ground. He looked at the messy lines on the ground. After a while, he reached out a hand and gently drew on the soil. Some were unnecessary lines. Some were mistakes made by Atsu due to its inexperience, and some were not very obvious. However, as his fingers moved, a simple drawing gradually appeared on the ground. The drawing was very simple. It was so simple that one could barely see the uneven and crooked lines formed by a few strokes. It looked like an undulating mountain range. Lu Chen looked at it silently for a while and then raised his head. Atsu's head was not far in front of him, and it was also staring at him. Lu Chen asked, "Do you want to go back to Kunlun Mountain first?" Atsu nodded. Lu Chen said, "Why do we go back? That place no longer welcomes us." His voice suddenly stopped, and then there seemed to be a gloomy expression on his face. He looked at Atsu and sighed softly. "So, you want to go back and see her again?" Lu Chen asked softly. Atsu nodded and barked, "Woof." Chapter 373. Lu Chen pondered for a long time on the southern bank of the Longchuan River. In the end, he did not choose to return to Kunlun Mountain. Of course, he did not forget Exin. She was a young girl with a smile as bright and warm as the sun. Even after so many years, her voice and smile could not be erased from his heart. However, it was not good to return to Kunlun Mountain. During that full moon night, many things happened. Lu Chen killed the young master of the Su family, Sumo. After his identity was exposed, he was hunted down by both the righteous and evil sections. If he returned, he would easily alert his old enemies. As for Exin, she had died that day. After Lu Chen avenged her, he had fled. It was probably the Yi family who helped her with her funeral arrangements. If he went back to look for her now, he would not even know where her grave was. He would have to secretly pry for her whereabouts. This was another matter that could easily alert others. However, the most important part of the matter was not this. Up until now, Lu Chen still couldn't figure out who that damn Baldy was, and he couldn't understand him. That person held a high position as a supreme, and his words carried enormous weight in the Kunlun Mountains and the surrounding areas. It could be said that he was already a supreme existence in a dignified and prestigious sect. However, at this point, Lu Chan still did not dare to say that he could completely trust him. Even when he suddenly recalled his childhood in the southern wilderness, whenever he returned to the chaotic lands and approached the human race, he would instinctively be wary of this true monarch Tianlan. The damned Baldy's heart was as deep as the ocean, and his cultivation was frighteningly high. As for his unpredictable methods, there was no need to mention anything else. At the very least, Lu Chen himself was taught by him. There was no one else in this world who knew more about the Baldy than Lu Chen. If possible, he would not want to be enemies with the Baldy. However, he did not know what Baldy thought of him now. Perhaps the greatest sorrow of being in the shadow business was that it was difficult to trust someone completely. Lu Chen made his decision and informed Atsu. Of course, he couldn't explain it in such detail to a dog, so he tried to simplify it as much as possible. He said to Atsu, "There's no hurry with Kunlun Mountain. Instead, let's go to the Immortal City and help him with the things that your cheap father told us to do." Woof! Atsu didn't seem to be very insistent. Perhaps for the sake of Lu Chen, he gave him some face. He mumbled a few words and followed him. Since the goal was set, the Longchuan River in front of him became the biggest problem to overcome. Neither Lu Chen nor Atsu had forgotten the scene of falling into the river, and neither of them wanted to try it again. However, the Longchuan River flowed right in front of them, with no end in sight. Lu Chen stood by the river and was at a loss of what to do. This is going to be a bit troublesome. Lu Chen muttered to himself with a frown. His eyes were already scanning the surrounding terrain, especially the areas with trees. He was already thinking if he could build a simple boat or raft to float across the water. However, if this section of the Longchuan River did indeed have some powerful and terrifying river beasts, once they were discovered, the small boats, wooden rafts, and the like would be no different from papier-mâché once they were discovered. At that time, if they fell into the river again, the same thing would probably happen again. For many years, the deeper the land of chaos went, the fewer cultivators who could reach this place. Most of those who could cross the Longchuan River were perfected cultivators in the Yuanying realm. At such a high cultivation level, flying was a remarkable ability that most people could master. Naturally, they would not be as troubled as Lu Chen and Atsu. Just as Lu Chen's head was aching and he was deep in thought, Atsu walked up to him from the side. He looked at Lu Chen, and there was a hint of disdain in his eyes. Lu Chen saw it and immediately became angry. He said, "What are you looking at? It's not like you don't know what's under the Longchuan River. Our cultivation level is not high enough, so it's very difficult to cross." Atsu snorted and even wagged its tail. It did not seem to mind Lu Chen's words at all. Instead, it looked a little proud. Lu Chen was a little puzzled. He stared at the big black dog that was slightly taller than him and said, "Why? You seem to disagree." Atsu barked twice and walked straight to the Longchuan River. Lu Chen watched it walk all the way to the riverside. Then, he saw the black dog look up at the sky. Its aura suddenly became especially imposing and arrogant. Suddenly, it roared twice. Woof, woof. The dog's barking spread far and wide, drifting on the wide surface of the Longchuan River. It was loud, but the feedback was not loud. Lu Chen watched from the side for a long time, only to see that the surface of the river was calm, and there was no reaction. Lu Chen walked to Atsu's side and patted the dazed Atsu. He said with a smile, "Although I don't know what you want to do, it seems that you did not succeed." Atsu looked angry, but also a little confused. At this moment, it seemed to have doubts about its own intelligence. It squatted by the river and stared at the river for a long time. All of a sudden, the black dog jumped up as if it had thought of something, and Lu Chen, who was standing beside it, jumped in fright. Atsu barked twice at the Longchuan River, but this time the sound was much shorter. Then it suddenly spat out something from its mouth. Lu Chen saw it clearly and realized that it seemed to be a golden stone the size of half a fist. The golden stone fell to the ground and rolled a few times before falling into the Longchuan River. Suddenly, there was a flash of golden light, and the water bubbled. The golden stone disappeared into the depths of the river in the blink of an eye. Then, Atsu solemnly barked a few times at the Longchuan River like before. The Longchuan River seemed to be so calm and did not seem to have any reaction. Luchan walked to Atsu's side and touched the somewhat dazed dog's head. He smiled and said, "What is that stone? Where did it come from?" Atsu looked very stunned. After a while, it turned around and barked in the direction it came from. Luchan thought for a while and said, "Did Sirius give it to you?" Atsu nodded. Luchan spread his hands and didn't know what to say for a moment. He thought to himself, perhaps the thing that Heavenly Wolf gave its son was also a treasure? At least when the golden stone was revealed for a short period of time, it looked quite magnificent. However, in the blink of an eye, it was thrown into the Longchuan River. He wondered what expression Sirius would have if he knew what had happened today. While the two of them were in a daze by the riverbank, a majestic aura suddenly came from the river. Before Luchan and Atsu could react, a huge tentacle suddenly broke out of the river and landed with a loud bang. It brought with it a large wave and directly gushed over. Luchan and Atsu's reactions were not slow. When they saw the wave rise, they hurriedly jumped away, avoiding the fate of being drenched. However, very soon, their eyes were fixed on the huge creature that suddenly appeared in the river. The tentacle, which was thicker than their bodies and several tens of feet long, was actually just one of the tentacles of the giant beast in the river. The part of the tentacle that was exposed above the water looked like an incomparably huge octopus. Its two huge black eyes stared down at the two ants on the riverbank from above. The huge creature looked at Luchan and then at Atsu. After a while, a hoarse and ear-piercing voice suddenly echoed in their ears. "Wolf Cub, did your perverted father ask you to find me?" Chapter 374. Luchan stared at the gigantic creature that had suddenly emerged from the Dragon River. He wasn't too surprised. Perhaps it was because he had been in the Bedlam lands for a long time. Especially this time, he had seen too many strange creatures and beasts that he had never seen before. He was a little numb to them. He even had the leisure to turn around and look at Atu, only to see that the black dog seemed to be startled as well and was a little dumbfounded. After a while, the giant octopus monster spoke impatiently in their ears again. At the same time, a giant tentacle reached out from the river. It was holding the golden stone that Atsu had thrown into the river. Atu immediately reacted and hurriedly nodded his head. The giant octopus monster snorted coldly. This time, its voice was like thunder, causing their ears to buzz. The octopus said unhappily, "It's just a small favor. You wolves are so stingy. It's been a few thousand years, and you still want to collect your debt." Luchan and Atu looked at each other in dismay. Luchan gave Atu a look with a questioning look in his eyes, but Atu immediately shook his head with an expression that said, "I don't know what happened to Father Heavenly Wolf back then either." The giant octopus looked a little indignant, but after complaining for a while, it slammed its tentacles into the water a few times, stirring up a big splash. Then it said to Atu as if it had accepted its fate, "Tell me, what do you want me to do for you?" As it spoke, it suddenly glared at them and said, "There's only one thing. You're not allowed to leave the Longchuan River. Otherwise, I won't pay for it." Luchan and Atsu looked at each other. After a while, they said in unison, "Oh no," they said it in unison, but they pointed at the opposite bank of the Longchuan River. "Cross the river. We want to cross the river." Woof, 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 woof. About an hour later, when they came down from the giant octopus, they had already reached the opposite bank of the Longchuan River. To them, the Longchuan River was extremely difficult and dangerous. But to this giant octopus, crossing it was as easy as taking a few steps at home. The octopus seemed to be in a good mood. It was probably relieved that a promise from years ago had been fulfilled in such a relaxed manner. It didn't even bother to explain anything to these two ants. After sending them to the north bank of the Longchuan River, it turned around and dived back into the river, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Lu Chen looked at the vast river and was amazed for a moment. He wondered what kind of vast underwater world it was that could accommodate so many giant beasts and all kinds of incredible creatures. At this time, Atu called out from beside him. Lu Chen turned around and saw Atu looking at him with a smug look on his face. It was as if he was asking for praise from someone who didn't live up to his expectations. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said unhappily, "I know, it's all thanks to you this time. It's good to have a good father." "Woof," Atsu responded. After crossing the Dragon River, they were still within the boundaries of the disorienting lands. However, it was obvious that they were in the outer regions. The danger level of the various hidden monsters and monsters had decreased significantly. Lu Chen and Atu had a much easier time dealing with them. At this time, Atu's soaring strength had gradually shown itself. Along the way, most of the time, it was not them who avoided or resisted the demon beasts. Instead, it was Atu who would often find trouble with the demon beasts. From time to time, he would bring back one or two prey to add to his meal. Lu Chen's strength had also improved greatly. However, his situation was very special. It could be said that he was different from most cultivators in the human cultivation world. The traditional foundation establishment, Jindan, and Yuanying realms didn't seem to have any meaning for him. At that moment, Lu Chen's skills and cultivation base were more similar to the shaman priests of the berserkers in the south. With black fire as his foundation, he had also learned quite a few strange and unfathomable shaman arts over the past few years. According to his own speculation, with his current strength, there was no doubt that he could defeat the foundation establishment cultivators of the human race. Even if he were to fight against Jindan Friar, he should be able to put up a fight. However, if it was a powerful cultivator of the Yuanying realm, Lu Chen still had some doubts. After thinking about it, those Yuanying spiritual masters were all powerful cultivators. How could it be so easy to catch up to them? At the same time, Lu Chen also thought of something that he had noticed before. The reversed aura of the 5 elements in the disorienting land didn't seem to have much effect on him anymore. This was especially obvious when he came over from the Great Snow Mountain. Lu Chen wasn't sure why, but he thought that it was probably related to the great increase in the power of the black flame in his body during this trip to the southern border. One man and one dog headed north. On the second day after they left the Longchuan River, they met a person. Yes, a human cultivator adventurer. That was the first person that Lu Chen and Atsu had seen in a few years. At that moment, it was hard to describe Lu Chen's feelings. He couldn't help but stare at the person in front of him for a long time. Atsu also looked very excited. It jumped and roared as if it was celebrating. After all, it had lived among the human race for many years. In the past, it had seen people like Lu Chen. At this moment, it probably felt a sense of familiarity. However, this scared the cultivator half to death. The land of chaos was fraught with danger. Aside from the various hidden dangers, there were also ferocious demonic beasts that roamed about. There was also the possibility of people plotting and killing each other. Thus, when he saw that the person opposite him was staring at him with malicious intent, and the incomparably large black wolf demonic beast next to him was roaring angrily with a menacing aura, as if it wanted to devour someone, the cultivator screamed, turned around, and ran away. He ran very fast. Lu Chen and Atu were left behind, their faces filled with shock. After that, Lu Chen and Atsu became more careful and restrained. After the initial excitement and joy, they quickly calmed down. This was the disorienting lands. Even the human race could be ruthless enemies here. Although it felt very dangerous, Lu Chen didn't feel uncomfortable. On the contrary, he actually felt a sense of familiarity. If it wasn't for the fact that he had always been calm and couldn't do something like, "I'm back to the mountains and forests like a fool," he might have sighed. Now that his cultivation was high and he was strong, the path that was difficult and dangerous in the past suddenly felt easy. They walked out of the disorienting land safely and smoothly. On the 6th day, they finally reached the edge of the disorienting land and left this chaotic land. Of course, the place they came out from was not the Crescent City from back then. In fact, In order to avoid people's eyes and ears, Lu Chun had specially chosen a remote exit to leave. On the way, he asked the locals for a bit and finally found out their approximate location. They were far away from the western continent, where Kunlun Mountain was located, but they were much closer to the immortal city towards the central plains. Could this be heaven's will? Lu Chun said casually to Atsu, then continued north. Everything seemed to be going to be like this, but as they walked, Lu Chun's footsteps suddenly slowed down. Atsu looked at Lu Chun suspiciously, only to see Lu Chun's expression suddenly become a little strange. He seemed to have thought of something, a little lost, but also a little yearning. After a moment, the man suddenly laughed, then said to Atsu, I thought of something. On the way to the immortal city, if we make a slight turn, we will actually pass by a place where I used to live. Do you want to go take a look with me? Woof. Lu Chun glanced toward a certain direction in the distance and said, Are you asking about that place? Yes, it's a small village in the mountains, extremely poor, but it's a very quiet and beautiful place. As he said that, he smiled and said, At the foot of T Mountain, Qingshitang Village. Chapter 375. Lu Chun had lived in Qingshitang Village for 10 whole years. During that period of time, he was like an ordinary person, living an ordinary life. He had his own joys and sorrows, and he experienced or even seemed to possess the life of an ordinary person. But sometimes, in some unknown place, he seemed to be a cold and lonely shadow, standing alone in a dark corner, looking at the world coldly. There was a huge gap between him and the ordinary people in the village, and he could never blend in. Therefore, when Lu Chun once again saw the tall T Mountain from afar and the village entrance at the foot of the mountain, he saw the fertile farmlands on both sides of the flat road, and there were people planting seedlings inside. He was in a trance for a moment, feeling as if he had turned back into the idle, joking, and scolding Lu Chun in the village. He composed himself, then patted Atsu beside him, pointed to the T Mountain in the distance, and said, You're too big now. Not only will you scare people easily when you enter the village, you'll also attract unnecessary trouble. Go around the side and play on the mountain. I'll go to the Dragon Lake at the top of the mountain to find you later. Atsu looked at him, but did not show any emotion. After wagging its tail, it ran off on its own. The surrounding mountains were undulating, and very soon, Atsu's figure disappeared into the wilderness. Seeing that Atsu had left, Lu Chun turned and walked towards the entrance of Qingshitang Village. The closer he got, the clearer the surrounding scenery became. Just like what he remembered, there were not many people on the road outside the village. Other than the occasional traveling merchants, he remembered that the busiest time of the month was probably when the people from the nearby Thousand Autumn sect came to purchase spiritual materials. The villagers who worked in the farmlands rarely raised their heads to look. Occasionally, some of them would look in Lu Chun's direction, but there was no emotion in their eyes. Instead, it was a look of numbness to life, to the world, and to their own fate. Lu Chun's gaze swept across the farmlands and the working people on both sides of the road, and then he walked over. He had lived here for 10 years and was used to this scene very early on. In fact, the way these working people looked was the impression he had of most people in Qingshitang Village. For the so-called illusory hope of becoming an immortal, they spent their entire lives risking their lives. They worked hard to accumulate wealth and went to gamble once. Then they lost everything, including all their money and their lives. In these 10 years, he had seen too many people like this. In Lu Chun's memory, the scenery in this village was fresh and beautiful, but the color of the people in this village was gray. However, Lu Chun did not belittle or look down on these ordinary people, because in those 10 years, he had always been one of them, although at that time, he could only be regarded as a somewhat cynical and unusual person, who did not want to become an immortal, who did not want to go straight to the top and be the center of attention. The dreams of ants wanting to soar high were never wrong. The only wrong was that they were ultimately powerless against fate. It was like a chasm in front of them that was difficult to cross, like a flight of stairs that was difficult to climb. They were angry in pain, roaring, then sad, disappointed, but they refused to give up and they would not despair. Thus, day after day, year after year, they became numb to the passage of time. Lu Chen walked into the village, and at that moment, he suddenly felt as if he had walked into the past. Everything in front of him seemed to be the same as before, and the Qingshitang village in front of him was also the peaceful little mountain village of the past. His gaze involuntarily looked in a certain direction. In those 10 long years, in his memory, most of the people in the village were gray in color, but he still remembered that there was once a beautiful woman who was a unique and beautiful scenery in his memory. She was Ding Dang, that passionate woman. She was still young, and at that time, she had not completely lost hope in life. In that period of time, she seemed to be the only shining light in this village. Until he suppressed the pain of his memories, Lu Chun began to look around the situation. The village was obviously livelier than the outside of the village. There were more people coming and going, and quite a few people noticed Lu Chun walking into the village. However, no one went up to ask or do anything else. The people here seemed to be wary of outsiders. What made Lu Chun a little surprised was that when he looked around, he could still vaguely recognize a few familiar faces in the crowd, but the villagers who originally lived here did not seem to recognize him. It was as if Lu Chun had never lived here before, as if Lu Chun had been erased from their memories. Lu Chun was a little surprised, but of course it was impossible for him to go up and grab these villagers and then go and greet them, pretending to be reunited after a long time, as if he was reunited with his family. In fact, when he was in this village, other than Old Ma, Ding Dang, and a few others who were familiar with him, the others were at most acquaintances who nodded at him. Their relationship was very ordinary. It was probably because of this that those people forgot about him very quickly. Lu Chen shook his head and did not pay attention to these people, and walked along the familiar bluestone path. On the side of the stone road was the clear stream. After so many years, the stream was still so clear that the bottom could be seen and the pebbles and fish could be seen clearly. It was exactly the same as in his memory. The mountain breeze blew down from the distant mountains, causing layers of ripples on the clear stream. On the two sides of the stream, the bamboo and peach blossoms set off each other, creating a beautiful scene. The scene in front of him suddenly told Lu Chun that it was spring in this world again. Lu Chun smiled, and his mood suddenly became much better. Walking on the stone road, he watched the peach blossoms bloom, and the petals fluttered in the wind. It was as if he could vaguely see that day the beautiful woman standing under the peach blossom tree. She seemed to still have a smile on her face, raising her hand and waving it at him. It was the most enchanting and beautiful picture scroll in ordinary life. Lu Chun walked past the peach tree, stretched out his hand, and broke off a peach branch from the tree. A faint fragrance greeted him. The peach blossoms bloomed like a smiling face, as if laughing at his busy and dreamy life in the world. Lu Chen grinned, smiled at the peach blossom in his hand, and said softly, "You should be relaxed now, right? Wait for me, I'll go see you later." With that, he casually put the peach blossom in his arms, and then walked away. Unknowingly, he arrived at the fork in the road, and a familiar big locust tree appeared in front of him, growing next to the clear water stream. Lu Chun looked over, and subconsciously looked at the big rock by the shore under the tree. In his memory, every day, there would be an old fisherman with the surname, "You sitting here fishing." But on this day, although the weather was good, the rock under the tree was empty. Lu Chun was stunned, stood there for a while, and then silently turned around and walked away. Walking along the road into the village, he soon saw the most familiar house in his memory. Nothing had changed here. That house was still a tavern. Even the word wine, written on the door, seemed to be the same as it was in the past. Everything was the same as in his memory, as if he had never left. Lu Chen was a little surprised, and then smiled. He thought to himself, the business opened by Old Ma is destined to lose money, and there is really someone who will take over and continue to open the pub? Are they stupid? However, looking at the flag with the word wine on it, he suddenly felt like drinking. So he strode over. Countless memories of the past surged into his mind, and he felt a burst of warmth in his heart. although he didn't know where fatty old Ma was now. With this thought in his mind, he stepped in and at the same time said, "Boss, give me 2 jugs of wine." His voice suddenly stopped, and he stood at the door of the pub with a stunned expression on his face and looked at the counter in the pub. He saw that behind the counter, a fat man turned around with some difficulty, looked at Lu Chun, curled his lips, and said unhappily, "You become good at drinking. Didn't you only ask for a jug of wine before?" Chapter 376. Lu Chun stared at the fat man and didn't speak for a long time. The expression on his face was a little strange. The fat man standing behind the counter also looked at Lu Chun. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, as if he had let out a long breath. Then, he touched his face with a smile and said, "What's wrong? You haven't seen me for so long that you don't recognize me anymore?" This fat man was Old Ma. Lu Chun couldn't be more familiar with his face. They had known each other for decades and lived together in this secluded Qingshutang village for 10 years. To put it bluntly, even if the fat Old Ma was disfigured, Lu Chun would still be able to recognize him at a glance. Lu Chun shook his head and suddenly smiled. Then he said, "You damn fat man, you're still alive? Puffed. I won't die even if you die." Old Ma pointed this out to Lu Chun very seriously. Then he walked out from behind the counter and walked in front of Lu Chun. He smiled and opened his arms. He said, "But fortunately, you're still alive. That's good." Lu Chun sighed. There seemed to be a look of contempt or impatience on his face, but in the end, he still reached out his hands and hugged Old Ma. The two men hugged each other tightly. Seemingly intentionally or unintentionally, they each patted each other's back 3 times. Then, they each took a step back and looked at each other. Suddenly, they laughed together. Lu Chun put away the black short sword in his right hand. Old Ma hid a sharp and tricky-looking spike in his sleeve. At the same time, he scolded jokingly, "Bastard, I saw that you really wanted to stab me in the stomach with the sword. I was so scared that I broke out in a cold sweat." Lu Chun spat and said disdainfully, "This kind of secret code after a long time was obviously thought up by you back then. I said it was useless, but you still wanted me to remember it. Now, you're the one making sarcastic remarks." "Scram," Old Ma said bluntly. "What I'm doing is the right way. Thanks to my ideas, we were able to live a stable life for 10 years. As for those who didn't use my method, their bodies are now lying all over the streets of Immortal City." Lu Chun couldn't help but laugh. He waved his hand and said, "You're good, all right?" As he spoke, he sat down at the wine table by the window, just like he did many years ago. He slammed the table and laughed loudly. "Boss, give me 2 jugs of wine." As the wine entered his stomach, the slightly intoxicating warmth spread throughout his body, giving him an indescribable sense of comfort. The tavern still looked the same as when he had stayed here many years ago. Business was poor, and there were not many customers. There were only the 2 of them in the huge tavern at the moment. "Why did you come back here, Old Ma?" Lu Chun took a sip of wine and asked Old Ma, "Didn't you follow me to Kunlun Mountain and then open what's the name of that shop in Kanwa City?" Lu Chun thought carefully, but before he could answer, Old Ma said lightly, "Black Hill Pavilion." "Oh, that's the name." Lu Chun said with a smile, "Kanwa City is hundreds of times better than Qingshutang Village. Why did you come back?" Old Ma seemed to be recalled by Lu Chun's words. After a moment of silence, he said, "When you publicly betrayed the Kunlun party, killed your way into Kanwa City's Sioux family, and finally fled to the ends of the world, I didn't have the mood to open that shop anymore. It just so happened that Lord Perfected Immortal had something for me to do, so I conveniently left the Kunlun party and went to Immortal City." "Immortal City?" Lu Chun suddenly frowned and asked. Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes, I went to Immortal City to secretly investigate Fuyunji. Lord Perfected Immortal suspected that there was a mole from the devil cult in Fuyunji." Lu Chun's expression changed slightly and became serious. He said, "There is a mole in Fuyunji?" Old Ma took a deep breath and said, "Yes. Do you remember that you were attacked by people from Fuyunji when you were fleeing?" Lu Chun snorted and raised his eyelids. He looked at Old Ma and said, Someone wanted to kill me. Of course I remember it clearly. I still clearly remember that at that time, I thought that damn Baldy had completely given up on me and was preparing to send people to kill me to silence me. Old Ma shook his head and said, "That's not the case. Lord Perfected Immortal had already secretly ordered that people from Fuyunji were not allowed to oppose you, let alone chase after you." I heard these words from him with my own ears. They were absolutely not lies. However, I don't know what happened, but something unexpected happened. A portion of the Floating Cloud Division's men in the Land of Chaos started to attack you. Lu Chen looked indifferently at Old Ma and didn't say a word. Old Ma felt a bit helpless. He sighed and said, "I say, you're good at everything, but you're too suspicious. I really didn't lie to you about this, and there's no need for me to lie to you." Lu Chen said, "So you found out about this?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, "It's not all my work. At least Xue Ying did a thorough check on her disciples. She probably found 3 or 4 people from Fuyunji. In the end, she confirmed that most of them were spies from the evil cult." Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Nowadays, the human race had been prosperous for many years. Many people had long lost interest in the rare evil cult. But in the human cultivation world, true Lord Tianlan of Zhengxiaming and Fuyunji under his rule were the vanguard against the evil cult. But now, even Fuyunji was found to have spies from the evil cult. From this, it could be imagined that after more than 10 years of hardship, their power and strength were completely different from before. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and casually asked Old Ma, "What happened to those who were caught?" Old Ma said, "At the East Market entrance of the Immortal City, they were executed in front of many people." Lu Chen was startled for a moment. He seemed a bit surprised and said, "Killed all of them?" Old Ma nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, killed all of them." No one in the tavern spoke for a while. Maybe it was because they heard that the spies hidden in Fuyunji were executed in public, or maybe it was some other reason. But after a moment, Lu Chen still asked Old Ma softly, "Is this what the damn Baldy wanted?" Old Ma was a bit hesitant, but after pondering for a moment, he still nodded slightly to Lu Chen and said, "Yes." "Okay, let's not talk about this." Lu Chen changed the topic and a smile appeared on his face. He stretched out his hand and patted Old Ma's shoulder and said, "When I returned to this village, I thought that maybe there would be great changes here, or maybe it would still be the same as before. But I didn't expect that you actually came back here." Old Ma curled his lips and said, "It's nothing. I helped True Lord to do that thing, and after catching the spies, I didn't do anything else. So one day, I suddenly thought that you wandered the world without any news. I didn't know where you would go. So in the end, I came back here and waited, hoping that you would come back one day." Lu Chen murmured, "It's really like that. In the vast sea of people, you actually found me." Old Ma laughed heartily and casually took a rag and wiped the table a few times. He then asked Lu Chen, "Oh right, I heard that when you were fleeing in the chaotic lands, not to mention how miserable it was, you often didn't have anything to eat for a whole day." Lu Chen snorted and lightly replied, "That's an exaggeration." Old Ma was obviously very familiar with Lu Chen. He put his hand on Lu Chen's shoulder and asked, "Oh right, where did you go after that? Why can't I find any news of you?" Lu Chen was a bit touched in his heart. He nodded and said, "If I said that I went to the southern wilderness these past few years, would you believe me?" Old Ma didn't even look at Lu Chen's sincere expression and calmly said, "Nonsense. I'd be a pig if I believed you." Chapter 377. Lu Chen laughed and said, "You are so fat. Whether you believe me or not, you still look like a pig." Old Ma spat, then waved his hand and said, "Don't give me that. I have been looking for you for the past few years. His Excellency has also given orders to Fuyunji to carefully search for your whereabouts, but they have not been able to find you. Where have you been hiding?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "I went to the south." Old Ma made a sound of agreement and said, "I think so too. In this world, the only place that can escape from Fuyunji and the evil cult is the chaotic land of chaos." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "Damn Baldy is still looking for me?" Old Ma seemed to sense something, and his expression became serious. He looked at Lu Chen and said, I have already told you that when you were suddenly chased by the people of Fiyunji while you were escaping, it was because the evil cult used a spy hidden in Fiyunji to give false orders. That is why it was a misunderstanding. Lu Chen's expression did not change much. He only said, "When did you find out?" Old Ma said, "It was His Excellency who felt something was wrong and secretly ordered me to go to Fiyunji to investigate. Then I found out about this." He glanced at Lu Chen with a hint of worry on his face. Even his voice had become a little deeper as he said, "You know me. I've never lied to you about something like this in all these years." Lu Chen slightly lowered his head, his expression indifferent. Old Ma could not tell what he was thinking at this moment, or whether he believed his words. After a while, Lu Chen asked again, "How did that damned Baldy react when he found out about this?" Old Ma immediately said, "After True Monarch heard about this, he was furious and immediately punished Fiyunji heavily. He carefully sifted through them from top to bottom, and even Shuang was killed. Let me tell you, I've followed True Monarch for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen him so angry. If Shuang wasn't his trusted aide who had followed him longer than me, and had always been loyal to him, risking her life for so many years, I'm afraid she wouldn't even be able to keep her position as the Hall Master of Fiyunji." Lu Chen remained silent for a short while before he said, "I never expected him to have such a huge reaction." Old Ma said, "Lu Chen, the True Monarch really thinks highly of you." Lu Chen raised his head and looked at Old Ma. After a moment, he smiled. "Later, I'll send a secret report about your return and let True Monarch know that you're back." Lu Chen picked up the wine cup on the table in front of him, rubbed it for a while, but did not drink. He only said, "So urgent?" Maybe there's no need to tell him, so urgently. Old Ma frowned, looked at Lu Chen and said, "Do you have something in mind?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "No, I just want to live a peaceful life this time." Without True Monarch's protection, you won't have a peaceful life at all. Old Ma pointed out this fact to Lu Chen mercilessly and straightforwardly. He said, "You've offended too many people, and the power of your enemies is too great. There are also many madmen who don't care about their own lives, and they have remarkable abilities. If you don't have a backer and only rely on your own strength, it will be very difficult for you to live comfortably." Lu Chen gave a wry smile and said, "You don't have to say it so clearly." Old Ma sneered and said, "Everything about you is good, but sometimes your thoughts are too complicated, and you are too suspicious. You don't believe anyone. If I don't tell you directly, you will most likely think about it by yourself." These words of Old Ma were very serious, but Lu Chen did not get angry. He just drank the wine in his cup in one gulp, then nodded and said, "You are right, but this temperament was developed when I was in the Devil's Sect. If I didn't do this, open my eyes even when I was asleep, be on guard every day, and constantly calculate, I'm afraid I wouldn't have lived until now." Old Ma suddenly stopped talking. After a long while, he gave a wry smile, and there was a hint of bitterness in his smile. He stood up and lightly patted Lu Chen's shoulder, but for a moment, he did not know what to say. Lu Chen raised his head and looked at him, then suddenly smiled and said, "Come on, don't give me this kind of face. It makes me look like I'm going to die soon." Old Ma laughed and covered the bitterness on his face. Then, after a moment of silence, he still straightened his expression and looked at Lu Chen seriously and said, "To be honest, Lu Chen, listen to me. Go back to the Immortals city with me and see the Supreme. I don't dare, and I don't have the qualifications to promise you, but I feel that the relationship between the two of you is definitely not what you think it is. You have to believe him." Old Ma said to Lu Chen softly but very seriously. "Believe him?" Lu Chen thought for a while, then slowly nodded. "Then let's go back to the Immortal City together?" "Okay, when are we leaving?" Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "It's better to be safe. I'll first send a secret report to the Supreme of the Immortal City and let him send someone to make arrangements, so that there won't be any accidents on the way." He glanced at Lu Chen and said, "You know, there aren't many people in this world who can cause more trouble than you." Lu Chen rolled his eyes at him and said, "Okay then, you make the arrangements. I'm going out for a walk." Old Ma said, "Hey, are you really going out for a walk? Don't tell me you're going to disappear without a trace after leaving the door." Lu Chen sneered and said, You're crazy. Can't you be more normal? You believe everything I say. Don't you trust me that much? Old Ma said sternly, you shadows are not normal people. Get lost. Lu Chun felt that his emotions were unusually complicated. He was a little relaxed, but also a little worried and uneasy. No matter how he thought about it, it was probably because he still couldn't see through that damn baldy. But who cares? Things were like this. Actually, so what old Ma said was very right and very reasonable. From a beginning until now, he never had much of a choice. He had always been tied to that damn Baldy's pirate ship. If he didn't follow him, didn't believe him, what else could he do? Lu Chun strolled in the direction of the tea mountain. When he reached the foot of the tea mountain, he quickly saw the straw hut that he used to live in. Most of the people in this King Shutang village lived in the village. Back then, he was the only one who lived at the foot of the mountain. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. Every night, there would be a mournful sound of the wind that sounded like ghosts wailing and wolves howling. Not many people could bear it. Lu Chun felt a sense of familiarity as he looked at the lush greenery of the mountain and the familiar, light aroma of tea drifting in the wind. He looked around and thought to himself, could this be the legendary feeling of homecoming? He slowly walked to the side of the straw hut. No one had lived in it for a few years, and it was very dilapidated. More than half of the thatch was gone, and the rest seemed to have rotted. The door was tightly shut, but there was a hole in the wall next to it. He didn't know who did it. Lu Chun walked over and pushed the door open. With a low squeak, the door slowly opened. A slightly moldy smell filled the air in the straw hut. Then there were those familiar things. Lu Chun stood at the door for a while. He looked up and saw that it was a dilapidated place. However, it wasn't like before, where a piece of thatch gently fell. It was like the time that he had spent in the past 10 years, which was finally gone forever. Lu Chun smiled and turned to leave. Then he walked up the tea mountain. On that mountain, Atsu should still be waiting for him. There was also a woman who was sleeping here. He also wanted to visit her. Let's just take it as a farewell to that period of time, if she's really watching from the heavens. Chapter 378. On the way up the mountain, Lu Chun saw some traces beside the thatched hut and the edge of the forest. He was reminded of the tragic battle that happened on the last night he was here. Now that time had passed, those traces had become smaller and fainter. Lu Chun immediately recalled the time when he walked into King Shutang village. He clearly remembered that the pursuit had affected the village, and that people had set many places on fire. However, the traces of the battle had basically disappeared this time. Everything had been covered up by new people, new houses, and new lives. Only the foot of the mountain far away from the village, a remote place where few people came, still had some traces of the battle. Lu Chun's gaze lingered on the traces by the roadside for a moment. Then he walked up the tea mountain. In front of him was still a mountain full of green tea trees. When the mountain wind blew, the green leaves converged into a green ocean, undulating up and down. Countless spirit tea trees grew on this mountain peak. Everything was green as far as the eye could see. This also made the roads here extremely complicated and confusing. However, this was not a problem for Lu Chun. He had lived here for 10 years, and he had walked up and down this tea mountain countless times. He could walk the roads here even with his eyes closed. He walked much faster than a few years ago, probably because he had recovered a lot of his cultivation. Soon, he reached the top of the mountain. There were forks in front of him, each leading in a different direction. One was the sinkhole, the other was the dragon lake. Lu Chun naturally walked towards the dragon lake. The mountain breeze that blew against his face gradually brought with it a trace of moisture. As he walked closer, the sound of water could be heard from the front. Lu Chun was slightly startled. In his memory, although the dragon lake at the top of the mountain was not small, the water was calm all year round. Even the tides were very weak. Other than some ripples in the mountain breeze, there was almost no other sound. When the weather was good, the scenery here was also extremely beautiful. It could be said to be worthy of the praise of the green mountains, clear waters, and smooth as a mirror. However, Lu Chen quickly thought of something. He frowned slightly and quickened his pace towards the dragon lake. Not long after, he walked to the edge of the dragon lake. Sure enough, he saw a huge black dog playing around in the beautiful dragon lake. It dived into the water for a while, came out for a while, and then slapped the water with all its might. The water splashed everywhere, and it was very lively. It was having a lot of fun. Lu Chen shook his head helplessly. He walked to the edge of the dragon lake and shouted towards the water, "Atsu, come up." Atu glanced at him and shook its head. It looked like it was unwilling to do so. Lu Chen coughed, then said solemnly, "Come back, there are demon beasts in the dragon lake. I heard that there's a very powerful and vicious fish." As he spoke, Lu Chen paused for a moment and then subconsciously recalled. It seemed that when he was still here a few years ago, someone seemed to have mentioned this to him. However, too many things happened after that, and a long time had passed. He actually couldn't remember it clearly. After hearing Lu Chen's words in the dragon lake, Atsu was stunned at first, then it barked at him twice, and actually swam towards him very obediently. This time, even Lu Chen was a little surprised. He didn't expect this stupid dog to be so obedient today. Originally, he thought that this time it would probably take a long time to trick this big dog to come back. He didn't expect that with such a casual talk, Atsu would actually come back. Atsu swam all the way back to the shore and then jumped onto the shore. Before Lu Chen could walk away, the big black dog's whole body shook violently. Suddenly, water splashed like rain, drifted in the air, and then fell with a pitter-patter. Lu Chen jumped away, glared at the stupid dog, and then turned to walk forward. Very quickly, he saw the grave that was piled up on the shore of the dragon lake. Yellow soil and rubble were mixed together, without a tablet or tablet, as if the person inside did not leave a trace in this world. Even her name had been blown away by the wind, never to be seen again. Who would still remember her beauty in the past? That woman who stood under the peach tree facing the wind, with thousands of light pink petals falling like rain, her smile like a flower. Then, like rain and wind, she scattered and scattered, disappearing from the world. Lu Chen stood in front of this nameless grave for a while, and then sat down. He sat next to the grave, looking at the gradually calming dragon lake and the open and clear sky in front of him. The surroundings were very quiet. The world looked very beautiful, and everything seemed so perfect. He was like a good friend that he hadn't met for a long time, sitting side by side, looking at the world, and then he smiled, using his hand to lightly pat the stone beside him, saying, "I've come to see you, Ding Dang. Actually, sometimes I think, if you didn't die back then, what kind of relationship would we have?" Lu Chen looked into the distant sky, as if he was chatting with a beautiful girl who was currently smiling and sitting beside him, quietly listening to him speak. With a trace of a faint smile, he said, "Actually, I thought about many results, and sometimes I thought it was very beautiful. But later on, I gradually realized that I was actually lying to myself." He touched the silent grave and softly said, "If you didn't die, I think the two of us wouldn't have a good ending. Either I let you down, or I harmed you." He smiled, but his smile was a bit bitter, saying, "You see, I was a bit angry at you back then, angry that you didn't want to be infatuated with me and chose someone else. But now that I think about it, not choosing me was actually very good. Although you were also blind, choosing another scum. AI, so you caused your own death. You're such an idiot." At this time, Atsu walked over from the side, curiously circling around Lu Chen twice, and then sniffing the ground around him, seeming to be a bit interested in the grave beside him. But very quickly, Lu Chen reached out a hand and hugged its dog head, saying, "This is a very important friend of mine. You must respect her a bit." With its head clamped by Lu Chen, Atsu did not have any intention of resisting, and instead conveniently laid down, snuggling up to Lu Chen's side. Only when its gaze swept over the pile of yellow soil, it still couldn't help but be curious. Lu Chen shook his head and softly said, "Things of the past. Even if I told you, you wouldn't understand, so I won't say it." Woof. On this day, Lu Chun stayed by the Dragon Lake on the Tea Mountain for most of the day. He only came down the mountain when the sky was getting dark and returned to the small pub. As soon as he entered the door, Old Ma came up to him, pulled him in, and then closed the door, saying, "Why are you only back now?" Lu Chun was not bothered and said, "I went up the mountain for a walk and looked at the scenery in the past." "What's wrong?" Old Ma said seriously, "I've already reported your matter, and I used the most secretive and fastest secret channel. Stay here tonight. At most in another 8 to 10 hours, the perfected cultivator might come back with news." Lu Chun was shocked and said, "So fast? That's not possible, unless that damn Baldy is near Qingshitang village. Otherwise, from what I know, it would take at least 2 to 3 days for you to pass the news to Fuyunji, right?" Old Ma chuckled and said, "Hee hee, that's a secret, but I can tell you that as long as I find the perfected cultivator, there's a special supernatural power that is extremely fast." Lu Chun looked at him and suddenly laughed and nodded. "All right, I'll wait here and see what that damned Baldy thinks of me, and if he will like me coming back." Chapter 379. It was already dark, and the mountain village was quiet. Most of the villagers had fallen asleep, except for the faint starlight in the sky. The village at the foot of Tea Mountain was dark. Only this small tavern still had some inconspicuous light. Lu Chun and Old Ma sat opposite each other and drank. They opened the window and looked at the night sky outside. The cold night wind blew in from outside, causing the candles placed on the table to flicker. It also reflected on their faces, making them look gloomy. Old Ma walked over and closed the window. The howling wind suddenly subsided, and the tavern became quiet. Then he turned to Lu Chun and said with a smile, "In the 10 years we lived here, we often sat here and drank like this in the middle of the night. Now that I think about it, it seems like a long time ago." Lu Chun thought for a moment and said, "It has been a long time. I remember that we drank like this many times in the first 3 or 4 years when I first came here. At that time, my mind was unsettled and I was injured. I always felt angry and irritated." Speaking of this, he pondered for a moment, but picked up the wine glass in front of him and raised it to Old Ma. "Thank you." Old Ma sat opposite him and said, "Thank me for thanking me for nothing." Lu Chun said, "Thank you for drinking with me and chatting with me in those days. Even when I scolded you for no reason, you tolerated it. It was not easy." He smiled, as if laughing at his old self. Then he raised his glass to Old Ma and drank it in one gulp. Old Ma looked a little relieved. He smiled and nodded. He also picked up his glass and took a sip. Then he said to Lu Chun, "It was so long ago, and you still remember it. It's just a small matter, not worth mentioning." Lu Chun was silent for a moment, and his face showed a little seriousness. He said to Old Ma, "I have almost no relatives in this world, and the only friend I can talk to is probably you. Therefore, I have always kept these things in mind." Old Ma was startled. He was probably surprised by Lu Chun's words. But very quickly, he lowered his head so that no one could see his expression. After a while, he suddenly raised his head with a smile and said to Lu Chun, "If you really want to repay me, why don't you repay the debts you owed me years ago? Drink." Lu Chun picked up the wine pot on the table and filled Old Ma's cup. He smiled and said, "We haven't seen each other for a long time. Don't mention those unhappy things." Old Ma was speechless. "I have something to ask you," Lu Chun said to Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes, go ahead." Lu Chun was silent for a moment and said, "After the full moon night of the Kunlun party, I escaped from Kunwu City and fled all the way to the end of the world. I have never returned to Mount Kunlun. After I left, how was the situation in Mount Kunlun?" Old Ma looked at him and said, "Do you want to know about the situation of the Kunlun party and Lore Perfected, or do you want to ask about the other people under them?" Lu Chun smiled, and then he said, "I can't hide anything from you. Tell me about it." "Yes." Old Ma paused for a moment, probably thinking about how to organize his words. After a moment, he said, "The Kunlun party still suffered some damage. The most important thing is, of course, the sudden death of Hakushin Jinkoin, one of the two deity transformation stage perfected cultivators in the past. This is a loss that can't be made up for in any case. But no matter what, there is still another deity transformation stage perfected cultivator in the Kunlun party. As long as perfected cultivator Tianlan is there, no one in the world dares to look down on the Kunlun party. So, in general, the Kunlun party hasn't changed much. Life has to go on. Even if one of the legendary spring, summer, autumn, and winter peaks suddenly crashed and destroyed, no more disasters happened to the Kunlun party. But now, on Mount Kunlun, perfected cultivator Tianlan's words are basically the law. Lu Chun frowned and said, "What about the original sect master, perfected cultivator Idle Month? She's in seclusion. She said that she's seriously injured and can't attend to matters." Old Ma's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. He pointed his finger at the sky above Lu Chen's head and said, "I heard that perfected cultivator Idle Month's injury is so serious that she needs at least 10 years of seclusion to recover. So now, even the position of sect master is held by the former first seat of Bai Chao Tang of the Kunlun party, perfected cultivator Qin Deng." Lu Chen looked at him, and Old Ma also looked at Lu Chun. They looked at each other for a moment, then shook their heads slightly. After a while, Old Ma said again, "As for the rise and fall of power in the Kunlun party, you can probably imagine it. It's nothing more than a change of ruler, a change of courtiers. Now, the disciples originally from Hakushin Jinquan's faction are suppressed and silent, while the disciples from Bai Chao Tang or other factions close to perfected cultivator Tianlan are incomparably glorious." Lu Chan suddenly seemed to think of something and said, "The glorious ones are Bai Chao Tang. Are there other factions close to the Dambaldi?" At this point, he still hasn't accepted a personal disciple in the sect. Old Ma glanced at him and shook his head. "No. In fact, a few years ago, I really heard that many people had this idea. In such a big Kunlun party, I don't know how many young talents want to be perfected cultivator Tianlan's disciple, but in the end, he declined one by one. To this day, he still doesn't have any official disciples." Lu Chun thought for a moment and then said, "The damn Baldy has a bad temper. It seems that he is destined to live alone." Old Ma glared at him and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, he still wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. He could only smile bitterly. Lu Chun also ignored him and said, "Don't just talk about the damn Baldy. Is there any news about other people?" Old Ma snorted and said, "Boy, just say it directly. Who do you want to ask about? Otherwise, how would I know what to say?" Lu Chen's fingers rubbed the wine glass for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "It's none other than those I know. Just tell me." Old Ma was silent for a moment and said, "In recent years, perfected cultivator Tianlan has focused on cultivating the new talented disciples in the sect and doesn't have too many sectarian views. Therefore, the original talented people in the Kunlun party have become more brilliant, and there are also a few new people who have risen later. Su Qingjun is the most famous one. Her cultivation is brave and vigorous. Together with He, she is known as the most outstanding disciple of the next generation of the Kunlun party. In Kunwu City, the Su family is also becoming more and more famous." Lu Chun looked at the wine glass in front of him in silence. After a long time, he nodded and said, "Yes, she's not bad. Based on my understanding of her, she should have achieved such achievements." Old Ma said indifferently, "These years, the Su family has spent a lot of money to search for the murderer who killed their young master." Lu Chun raised his head and looked at him. After a moment, he suddenly smiled. Old Ma said, "So, boy, it's right that you didn't go back to Kunlun Mountain first. If you go back, you will definitely be discovered, and then what awaits you is the scene of the righteous and devil sects hunting you down in the past." Lu Chun waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about it. This kind of thing will be controlled by that damn Baldy." After a pause, he asked again, "What about the others?" Old Ma said, "Who do you want to ask? How is that little girl, White Lotus?" "Oh, her? She seems to be living a good life. I heard that she has always stayed by perfected cultivator Tianlan and has never left." Lu Chen's eyes suddenly flashed. He looked up and said in a deep voice, "Damned Baldy wants to take White Lotus as his disciple. Chapter 380. Old Ma was stunned for a moment. Then he shook his head and said, "I haven't heard of that. I don't think so." Lu Chen looked at him for a while, then nodded and said nothing more. Old Ma looked at the night outside the window and asked casually, "By the way, I've always wanted to ask you something. What happened to the black dog? I remember that you took it away, and I don't know where it went. What happened to it now?" Lu Chen was a little surprised, and a smile appeared on his face. He said, "You still remember Atsu?" "Of course. How can I not remember?" Old Ma said with a smile. "That dog can eat very, very much." Lu Chen said with a smile, "It still follows me, but there have been some changes in the past few years. It has grown a lot. I'm afraid that bringing it into this village will scare other people, so I let it wait outside." Old Ma was a little surprised and said, "Atsu actually follows you. That's not bad. Bring it over and let me have a look. I haven't seen it for a few years, and I kind of want to see it." Lu Chen nodded with a smile and said, "No problem. I'll go and have a look later." The two chatted in the tavern, drinking and talking about the past. A long time passed unknowingly. In the dead of night, Old Ma suddenly got up and left the tavern. After about half an hour, he came back and went straight to Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at him and said, "What's wrong?" There was a smile on Old Ma's face. He seemed to be in a good mood. He said joyfully, "I have received a reply from Lord Perfected Immortal. He is very happy and wants to see you very much. However, he is now in the Divine City and has too many trivial matters to deal with. He really can't leave, so he asked me to take you to the Divine City to meet him." "Going to Immortal City," Lu Chen murmured. Old Ma said with a smile, "It's not like you haven't been to that place before. Why don't you dare to go?" "That's not it." Lu Chen sighed with emotion. He smiled with a complicated expression and said, "That's a good place." Lu Chen did not ask Old Ma how he could contact Immortal Tianlan from such a long distance in only a few hours. This should be a secret that only Old Ma knew. However, after deciding to return to the Immortal City, Old Ma quickly began to prepare. After daybreak, he had already prepared everything that he needed to bring. On the other hand, Lu Chen had been sitting there leisurely from the beginning to the end, even though he looked empty, as if he had brought nothing with him. Old Ma was a little confused, so he asked Lu Chen, "Where's your luggage?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "I'm used to wandering around alone, so I don't usually bring too many things." Old Ma did not seem to believe what he said, but Lu Chen did not wait for him to think too much. He dragged him out and said, "Let's go. I'll bring you to see Atsu." Old Ma looked at him, nodded, and did not say anything else. The two of them walked out of Qingshitang village when there were not many people in the morning. The official road outside the village stretched forward. The two of them walked on the road, and before long, without Lu Chen calling out to anything, they saw a black shadow jump out of a nearby hill and run towards them. The shadow got closer and closer, and its body grew larger and larger. Old Ma was a little surprised at first, but after hearing the dog barking and seeing Lu Chen's calm look, he immediately reacted and said to Lu Chen in surprise, "Atsu." "Yes, that's it." Lu Chen nodded. "Good fella." Old Ma's eyes were a little dazed as he saw the huge dog suddenly running towards them. Just by looking at its body, it was a little taller than both of them. Those ordinary beasts, such as tigers and lions, were simply like little kittens in front of this black dog. At this moment, Atsu also saw Old Ma, who was standing beside Lu Chen. It squinted its eyes, but it did not seem to have much of a reaction. Old Ma was a little annoyed and complained to Lu Chen, "This fella is a little heartless. Back then, in Kunwa City at the foot of Mount Kunlun, you left it with me. I took care of it with all my might and never neglected its food and drink. I didn't expect that in just a few years this dog would no longer recognize me." Lu Chen laughed and casually pushed Old Ma's shoulder. He jokingly scolded, "You're actually arguing with an animal?" Old Ma mumbled, "Anyway, that's the logic. It's a pity that I had so many meat bones back then." Although it was complaining, it seemed like Atsu really did not remember Old Ma. Or perhaps it was because they had not met for a long time that this dog had forgotten most of its memories of Old Ma. In short, it was very cold. After complaining to Lu Chen for a while, Old Ma, of course, did not really care about it. In the afternoon, they passed by Nansong Mountain. There was a cultivation sect on that mountain, which was the Thousand Autumn sect that had been controlling King Shutang village for so many years. Within a radius of tens of miles, apart from the occasional cultivators from other sects that passed by, the Thousand Autumn sect was basically the ruler of this land. Looking at Nansong Mountain from afar, one could see the pavilions and pavilions. White clouds floated in the air, and it did indeed look like a fairy. Lu Chun glanced at the mountain and asked Old Ma, "How's the Thousand Autumn sect doing lately? Are they still doing that shady business of cheating people of their spirit stones?" Old Ma shrugged. "They've never stopped." As he spoke, he looked at Lu Chun. A strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes, but he still wore a smile on his face. He asked casually, "Why, you don't like them?" Lu Chun looked at the beautiful scenery on the mountain in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, "I don't really like what this sect does, but I'm afraid that most of the cultivation clans in the world are doing this, so I have nothing more to say." Old Ma laughed and nodded at Lu Chun. Then, the two of them walked side by side. Black Dog, who was standing behind them, looked up at the mountain. "By the way, did I tell you something else?" Old Ma seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He pulled Lu Chun aside and said, "I heard that in Immortal City nowadays, dogs are not allowed to be kept or openly bring all kinds of pets on the streets. So, it's hard to say whether Atsu can follow you into the city." Lu Chun was stunned for a moment. Then, he said in surprise, "What kind of rule is that? I don't remember hearing about it before." Old Ma smiled and said, "You really don't know. This happened just half a year ago. At that time, Immortal Tiehu, one of the 6 immortals of the Alliance of True Immortals, suddenly opened his mouth and ordered that dogs were not allowed to be kept in the Immortal City. He even sent people to search the streets and killed countless dogs in a month." As he spoke, he turned to look at Black Dog and said, "This dog of yours is frighteningly big. I'm afraid that no matter what, it will offend the guards of True Lord Tiehu. When it gets slaughtered and stewed, don't blame me for reminding you." Lu Chun nodded slowly and responded. Then he smiled and said, "It seems that True Lord Tiehu has a lot of ideas. Even the Heavenly Law Hall doesn't seem to be enough to satisfy him. But to kill dogs in a city like this, no one came out to persuade him? Who would persuade him to do such a thing?" Old Ma sneered. Lu Chun also laughed. Then he looked at the road in the direction of Immortal City in the distance. He wondered what he would encounter this time in Immortal City, which was known as the largest city in the vast land of the Divine Land. A true lord of deity, stage, who likes to kill dogs? Lu Chun thought to himself. Chapter 381. Huashan perfected cultivators were high and mighty figures in the cultivation world of the human race. They were revered by all. Every Huashan perfected cultivator status was similar to that of a demigod. And in the Immortal City, or in the world's most powerful Xingxiaming, the 6 Huashan perfected cultivators could be said to be the most powerful figures. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were directly in charge of the life and death of all living beings. Since the status of Huashan perfected cultivators was so high, they naturally would not pay attention to some insignificant matters. Moreover, these perfected cultivators all had a large group of people following them. Naturally, there would be a large group of people helping them. Therefore, this was the first time in many years that Lu Chun had heard that a Huashan perfected cultivator would actually pay attention to the problem of whether there were many dogs in the Immortal City. It was a bit like a legendary dragon suddenly paying attention to an insignificant ant in the dust at its feet. This Tiehu perfected cultivator is a bit interesting. Lu Chun said to Old Ma as they hurried along. "Have you seen him?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "I haven't seen him. The 6 perfected cultivators in the Immortal Alliance are all high and mighty figures. Other than this one from our own family, I don't have the qualifications or the opportunity to see them. It's just a meeting. How can it be considered an opportunity?" Lu Chun said disapprovingly. Then he pondered for a moment and said, "But if there really is such a ban, it will be a bit troublesome. It won't be easy for Atsu to follow me into the city." "Atu, who was following beside him, seemed to understand a little, and its large dog head came over to take a look. Lu Chun smiled at it and rubbed its head, saying, "It's all right. If worst comes to worst, you could just wait for me outside the city. And it's not impossible. Wait for me to think of a way. Maybe I can bring you into the city." Then he glanced at Old Ma and said, "According to what you said, there is not a single dog in such a large territory in the Immortal City?" Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, "Of course not. There were hundreds of millions of people in the Immortal City. Even if it was impossible for everyone to have a dog, there were still many dog lovers. After Taihu True Monarch's dog prohibition order was issued, many dogs were indeed hunted and killed. All kinds of dogs on the streets of Immortal City also disappeared for a while, but there are definitely still many dogs left in the city." Lu Chun raised his eyebrows slightly, looking a little curious. Smiling, he said, "Seems like the Immortal City is indeed a place with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. There's actually someone who dares to ignore the ban of a soul formation perfected lord. And for what you said, it seems like there are quite a number of such people." Old Ma thought for a while and said, "Not necessarily. After all, he is a perfected cultivator. Everyone has to be careful. But in the Immortal City, there are still quite a few people who still keep dogs. It's just that everyone is a little more restrained and no longer swagger their dogs on the streets like before. They keep them at home? Yes, they usually keep them at home and occasionally bring them out for a stroll. They just have to be careful. After all, the people who still keep dogs now have some status. Those guards who kill and ban dogs in the city mostly turn a blind eye when they see them." Lu Chun nodded and asked again, "Then the dogs that were killed in the past?" Old Ma sneered and said, "Of course it's the dogs of those commoners. Oh, there were indeed quite a few wild dogs in the Immortal City, so they were all killed. In the past, there would often be incidents of mad dogs biting people in the Immortal City. You know, in that kind of place, it's very easy to have mixed blood wild dogs and the like. Every year, there are actually quite a number of people who are bitten to death by mad dogs. But after Taihu True Monarch's ban was issued, the situation became much better. Then it seems that this ban is not completely without its benefits." Lu Chun said with some surprise. Old Ma laughed and said, "You can say that, but this matter, we small characters and commoners take it seriously. People like Lord True Monarch definitely don't care about it. Maybe he will just casually give an order and then be too lazy to care. I heard that the people who carry out this ban under Taihu True Monarch have done some unbearable things and caused a lot of public anger." "What do you mean?" Lu Chun looked a little curious. Old Ma laughed and said, "What else can it be? It's nothing more than those tricks of bullying the weak and fearing the strong and bullying the kind. These people don't dare to provoke the rich and influential families, but when it comes to bullying the commoners, they don't hesitate to come and catch the dogs. At the same time, there are also extortion and blackmail. I haven't been in the Immortal City these days, but I heard that because of this ban, there is a foul atmosphere and the people are boiling with anger." Lu Chun frowned and said, "So bad? That Taihu True Monarch doesn't know about it?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "Lord True Monarch is a high and mighty person who knows how many things he has to do every day. He won't pay attention to such a small matter." Lu Chun's eyes flashed, and after a moment, he suddenly said, "I don't know about the people under Taihu True Monarch, but the dead Baldy has a large number of people under him, especially Fiyunji, such a sinister and cunning hall. He definitely knows about it, right?" Old Ma coughed and didn't say anything. Lu Chun snorted and revealed an as expected expression. Then he shook his head and didn't say anything. Along the way, with this incident of dog ban mentioned by Old Ma unintentionally, Lu Chun asked Old Ma some things about Tai, who True Monarch, without batting an eyelid, as if it was incidentally. According to Old Ma, Taihu True Monarch was a highly respected big shot who was a little older than Tian Lan True Monarch. But for Lu Chun, this answer was meaningless, because first of all Huashan True Monarchs were highly respected. If they didn't admit this, they probably couldn't stay in Zhengxiaming or the Immortal City any longer. In addition, The dead Baldy Tianlan was indeed a rare genius. Among the 6 true monarchs in Zhengxianming, he was the youngest one. In other words, all the Huashan true monarchs were older than the dead Baldy. After being despised and questioned by Lu Chun, Old Ma had to search his memory again and told Lu Chun some things about Taihu true monarch that he could think of in his daily life. In this way, it seemed that a more complete image of a Huashan true monarch gradually became clear in front of Lu Chun. Needless to say, Taihu true monarch was born in a famous cultivation sect, Tianluo true monarch. In addition, this true monarch had a serious and cautious temperament. For many years, he had always been fair, so he was in charge of the Hall of Heavenly Law, which was in charge of law and punishment in Zhengxianming. He was impartial and had always been respected by the world. Behind this true monarch was a rich and powerful family, and he also had several proud disciples, all of whom were outstanding geniuses in Tianluo sect. Under his command, the Hall of Heavenly Law had a very strong guard, which was said to be among the top 3 in the ranking of the various mountains in Zhengxianming. In short, he was basically an incomparably strong and superior big shot. In addition, at the last moment, Old Ma said to Lu Chun calmly, "Well, I heard that this lord doesn't like our boss, Tianlan, true monarch. They are like fire and water." Chapter 382. How so? These two are both spirit-severing true monarchs, and they're both in Zhengxianming. How could their relationship be so bad? Lu Chun asked in surprise. Old Ma thought for a while and said, "I only know a little about the ins and outs of this matter. There are many things that only these 2 lords know. But as far as I know, Taihu true monarch has been dissatisfied with Fiyunji for a long time. He often publicly said that our hall is a waste of money and is useless. Even Hall Master Shui Ying has been criticized by him several times." Lu Chun nodded and revealed a trace of a smile on his face and said, "Shui Ying must be very depressed, right? Isn't that so?" Old Ma laughed and said, "With Hall Master Shui Ying's identity, she can actually be considered a big shot in the Immortal City. Ordinary people don't dare to provoke her. But Taihu true monarch is not an ordinary person, and he is probably one of the few humans in the Immortal City that Hall Master Shui Ying doesn't dare to provoke. Damn Baldy didn't stand up for his subordinates?" Lu Chun asked. Old Ma hesitated for a while and said, "This matter is actually not easy to handle. Taihu true monarch only said a few words and didn't really make a move or suppress them. Then, with his identity, even our true monarch can't say much. After all, in terms of seniority, Taihu true monarch is a bit older." Speaking up to here, Old Ma sighed again and said, "But then again, these few years in Fiyunji has not been very smooth. Many things have gone wrong, and people have seen them as a joke. In addition, the remnants of the devil sect are sinister and cunning. They are really hard to deal with. Those who don't know the inside story will often ridicule them." Lu Chun was silent for a while, and suddenly sneered and said, "Ordinary people might be like this, but how can people who have reached the position of true monarch not know the inside story of this kind of thing? In my opinion, that Supreme Taihu most likely has other plans in his heart." Old Ma was stunned for a moment. Then he nodded and said hesitantly, "Now that you mention it, it seems to make sense. When you reach the Immortal City and see Lord True Monarch, you might as well mention this to him." Lu Chun looked at him with a smile and shook his head. "Although this damned Baldy is sinister and cunning, with a belly full of evil tricks, in all these years, I've never seen anyone more powerful than him in both the righteous and evil Tao. So I think he probably knows about this kind of thing in his heart. He just doesn't want to say it." Old Ma laughed and nodded. "That makes sense. I didn't expect you to think so highly of Immortal, even though you are usually dissatisfied with him." Lu Chun rolled his eyes and said grumpily, "Nonsense. Who in this world would look down on a divine, transformation stage, perfected cultivator? He's either a lunatic or a fool." Of course, Lu Chun and Old Ma were neither lunatics nor fools, so they quickly reached an agreement on this matter. At the same time, Lu Chen also casually asked Old Ma about the current situation in the Immortal City and Zhengxiaming. Old Ma also told him everything honestly. It seemed that he did not hide anything from him. Although he was currently living in seclusion in the remote mountain village of Qingshitang Village, and no one knew how long he had stayed here before Lu Chen appeared. But from the conversation between Lu Chen and Old Ma, it was obvious that this fatty Old Ma seemed to be very familiar with Zhengxiaming, including the various forces and factions in the Immortal City, as well as the various undercurrents surging under the water surface. It was obvious that he was a person who had immersed himself in the Immortal City and Zhengxiaming for a long time. Because of this, Lu Chen actually had a preliminary understanding of the various forces in Zhengxiaming and Immortal City just by listening to Old Ma's narration during the past few days of travel. But in the end, he still said to Old Ma very seriously, "Now I've memorized most of the things you said, so I have an idea of what to do. But right now, I have two more important things to ask you." Old Ma smiled and said, "Ask away. I'll tell you everything I know. Don't worry." Lu Chen stretched out a finger and said, "First, although the damn Baldy didn't sit on the throne of the Kunlun Party's leader, his position in the Kunlun Party is almost unparalleled. It can be said that he has control of this famous cultivation sect, right?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Of course." Now, from the top to the bottom of the Kunlun Party, the only perfected cultivator in the soul formation stage can be said to be respected as a god. Lu Chen said faintly, "If that's the case, I find it strange. Why didn't the damn Baldy stay in the Kunlun Mountain and be a local tyrant? Instead, he insisted on coming to Immortal City to be squeezed by people. Maybe there's something dangerous." Old Ma frowned, hesitated for a moment, and said, "In fact, it's not just what you said. After the master completely controlled the Kunlun Party, he began to gradually summon the talents of the Kunlun Party, including those Yuan Jinren with profound cultivation, to Immortal City. Of course, on the surface, he said that he had too many relatives and friends, but in the end, many of these people were still placed under his sect. Well, there are no personal disciples. Everyone is a registered disciple." Speaking of this, his eyes looked at Lu Chen with deep meaning, but Lu Chen didn't seem to notice Old Ma's eyes for a while, or maybe he didn't want to be entangled in this kind of thing at all. At this moment, his attention was completely fixed on another thing, and he looked extraordinarily focused. Lu Chen looked around and suddenly said, "You mean many of the young, outstanding disciples of the Kunlun Party have come to Immortal City?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes, and these people basically only know how to respect him. Although Zhengxiaming's intention is to incorporate these people into Fuyunji, now is probably not the time." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Using public resources for private purposes, this can be considered as using Zhengxiaming's money to cultivate their own children." Old Ma smiled and said, "Isn't that so? But probably because of this, after Tiehu Zhengxiaming, who is in charge of Heavenly Law Hall, knew about this, he flew into a rage. His subordinates also suddenly became excited and began to stir up trouble. Once, they even took away a few people from Fuyunji, humiliated them by the river outside the city, and then ran away without leaving their names." Lu Chen glanced at him and felt that it was a little funny, and said, "Since they didn't leave their names, why do you think that it was done by Tiehu Zhenxiang's subordinates?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "When you stay in Immortal City for a long time, you will probably be familiar with the rules here." Lu Chen didn't care, and just brushed over this issue and didn't talk about it anymore. Now he wanted to talk about another matter. "There is one more thing, Old Ma." "Say it," Old Ma replied. "Over the past few days, I've heard about the true Immortal Alliance along the way. They're really worshipping them as if they're gods. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the Immortal City who are itching to make a move. But these are none of my business. I just want to ask you, what did the damn Baldy tell you? Such a long journey. He wouldn't really let only the two of us finish it, right?" Old Ma was startled for a moment, then nodded and said, "You really know Zhengxi angrily. In fact, after knowing our decision to return to Immortal City, Zhengxi angrily thought about us, and specially arranged people to protect us." Who is it?" Lu Chen asked curiously. For some reason, old Ma's expression looked a little subtle. After a while, he was heard coughing and said, "I heard that it is White Lotus." Chapter 383. Her again. Lu Chun was obviously startled. After a moment of silence, he said to old Ma, with a strange expression on his face, "If I remember correctly, White Lotus should be the last disciple of Hakushin Jinkuin in the past, right? That damn Baldy actually treats her differently. It really doesn't seem like his character." Old Ma shrugged and said, "Who knows? That little girl's identity has long been made public, at least in the Kunlun party. Everyone knows about it. But don't think too much about it. Although Perfected Immortal has always kept White Lotus by his side for the past few years, he has never officially announced that he wants to accept her as a disciple." Lu Chan shook his head, his face calm, and said, "I won't think too much about it. I don't care who that damn Baldy wants to accept as a disciple. I just feel a little strange that he would actually keep Hakushin Jinkuin's disciple by his side." Old Ma smiled and said, "When I first heard about this, I actually felt a little strange in my heart, but Perfected Immortal's heart is as deep as the sea, and his plans are far-reaching. It's not a big deal that I can't see through it." Lu Chen didn't immediately respond to him, but just walked forward in silence for a while. After a while, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "I have a guess about what that damn Baldy is thinking. Do you want to hear it?" Old Ma's body paused, and he turned to look at Lu Chun, only to see that Lu Chun had a gentle smile on his face. Old Ma looked at him for a while, and then said, "I don't want to hear it." After saying that, he continued to walk forward, leaving Lu Chun standing in the same place. Lu Chen's face finally revealed a trace of astonishment, but then he laughed and sped up his pace to catch up with Old Ma. Walking side by side with Old Ma, Lu Chun said with a smile, "Damn fatty, I haven't seen you for a few years, but you look a lot smarter." "Bah!" Old Ma spat at him, then sneered. "The superior is respected. Those who dare to pry into the private affairs of the venerable, especially those in our line of work, never live long. I'm still young. I don't want to die early." After that, Old Ma continued to walk forward without looking back. It seemed that he regarded Lu Chun as a snake or a scorpion. Lu Chun, on the other hand, didn't seem to mind and even laughed. He caught up with him in a few steps and said with a smile, "That damned Baldy still thinks highly of you. What are you afraid of?" "Bullshit." Old Ma looked very annoyed and said grumpily, "No matter what, I'm just a subordinate who runs errands for the Immortal. It's our duty to abide by the rules and not overstep them. On the contrary, you are the one who has a close relationship with the Immortal. You can say whatever you want, but I don't want to touch it at all." Lu Chen looked at him and said with emotion, "Nowadays, even you have become so smart. It's really hard to mix in the underworld of cultivation." Old Ma ignored him and just walked forward with his head down. Lu Chen stretched and said, "How about this? I'll say a few words to myself now. Just let it go in one ear and out the other. After all, we have a good relationship." Old Ma remained silent, as if he had completely covered up Lu Chen's voice. However, Lu Chen could still clearly see through some slight movements of Old Ma's body that this guy was secretly stretching his ears to listen carefully. Lu Chen didn't care. He coughed and said after a moment of silence, "Based on my understanding of that damned Baldy, if the infighting in the Kunlun party was really just a fight between him and Hakushin Jinkuin, then now he would never take care of Hakushin Jinkuin's disciples." Lu Chun nodded to the expressionless Old Ma next to him, and then said very clearly, "He is not the kind of person who is magnanimous. In the past, when someone angered him, it would have been fine if it was an ordinary mortal, because that damned Baldy couldn't afford to find trouble with mortals. But if it was a cultivator who angered him, the result was usually not good." Old Ma coughed and said, "Now, Lord Perfected Immortal has already cultivated his moral character, and his temper has become very good. Those things in the past will not happen again." Lu Chun sneered, obviously not believing what Old Ma said, and then said to himself, "Because of this damned Baldy actually showed great kindness this time. There's something wrong." "What's wrong?" Old Ma couldn't help but ask. He must be buying people's hearts. Lu Chun said seriously. After that damned Baldy defeated Hakushin, Jinquin, and took control of the Kunlun party, there must be many people watching what he did, and they must be anxious. But as long as this news gets out, probably everyone will think that if this perfected immortal Tianlan can even take care of his senior brother's last disciple, isn't this very righteous? Old Ma coughed, and then said seriously, Lord Perfected Immortal is really righteous. But this matter actually has nothing to do with that little girl named White Lotus, right? Lu Chun smiled and said, in addition to buying people's hearts, that damned Baldy kept White Lotus by his side to cultivate, there's probably one more important reason. Old Ma couldn't help but be curious, and asked, what is it? She's a 5-pillar genius. Lu Chun smiled, but when the smile was reflected in Old Ma's eyes, it seemed to be a little cold at that moment. And in his ears, Lu Chen's voice continued to echo. Such a genius is rarely seen in 1,000 years. And even if there is one, she may not be able to enter the Kunlun Mountain. How could that damned Baldy give up such a chance? He smiled, looking very happy and gratified, and said to Old Ma with a smile, don't you think so? Old Ma was in a daze for a while, and suddenly turned around and strode forward, muttering at the same time, what a mess, I'm confused. Lu Chun and Old Ma met White Lotus on the 4th day after they went out. On that day, the sky was a little gloomy, and it was almost dusk. Even Atsu, who was following them, looked a little sleepy. Lu Chun discussed with Old Ma to find a place to rest first, and then continue their journey the next morning. While they were chatting, Atsu, who was originally lying at Lu Chen's feet, suddenly quivered, and then its ears pricked up, it opened its eyes, and looked forward. Lu Chun and Old Ma seemed to feel that something was wrong at this moment, and then they saw the last ray of sunset in front of them. The pale golden light sprinkled on the ground, and the leaves and weeds on both sides of the road seemed to be plated with a layer of golden light, shining beautifully and admirable. A girl in white appeared on the road in front of them, looking in Lu Chen's direction with a frosty expression. Lu Chen's eyes met hers, and for a moment, he was also filled with emotions. He thought that if it wasn't for the bad luck, this girl in front of him might have fallen into the barbarian wasteland in the south with him. However, it was a little boring to think about these things now, so Lu Chen smiled and waved at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at him, and then at Old Ma, and finally slowly looked down and saw the big black dog lying next to Lu Chun. A huge black dog, which looked more like a demon beast than a domestic black dog, was lying there, and looked like it was about to fall asleep. Hey! White Lotus suddenly shouted, stupid dog, how long has it been? And you already don't recognize me. Atsu's body suddenly trembled, and then it slowly raised its head, looking at the girl in white in front of it. After a moment, Atsu suddenly let out a whine, and a trace of fear appeared on its face. Chapter 384. There was a hint of surprise in Old Ma's eyes as he looked at White Lotus in front of him. He did not notice the abnormality of Atsu next to him. However, Lu Chun was different from him. He had been with this black dog almost every day for the past few years, so he noticed the abnormality of Atsu almost immediately. He could not help but frown. After Atsu's breakthrough a few years ago, Lu Chun rarely saw this kind of fear in him. Even when he ventured into the depths of the southern lands with Lu Chun in the future, Atsu was still carefree, roaming the world with ease. However, on this day, when Atsu saw White Lotus, it suddenly showed this kind of abnormal emotion, which surprised Lu Chun. Perhaps Atsu still remembered the encounter in Kunlun Mountain? A figure walked up from behind and stood in front of Atsu, blocking Atsu's sight. It was Lu Chun. He reached out his hand and touched Atsu's head. Atsu seemed to feel something and looked at him. The fear in its eyes quickly dissipated, and it became clear and calm again. Whether it was Lu Chen's hand or Atsu's fur, they were both warm. Lu Chen smiled and nodded to Atsu, then turned around and looked at White Lotus. After a few years, White Lotus was no longer the child she used to be. Today, she was still delicate and beautiful, and her temperament was still pure and cold. She still gave people the feeling of an ice fairy. But it was undeniable that this girl was approaching, or should it be said that she was about to enter the most beautiful, brilliant, and dazzling youth of her life. Her body had grown a lot taller, and she looked more and more slender. Her figure was gradually revealed, making people's eyes light up. It was as if this girl was born with a dazzling light that made people unable to ignore her and subconsciously want to take a few more glances at her. Luchan nodded to her, showed a smile, and said, "Long time no see." White Lotus's gaze fell on him, and there was a trace of hidden and very complicated expression in the depths of her eyes. When she was about to speak, suddenly all three people present heard a roar from behind Luchan. It was Atsu who poked its head out from behind Luchan. But this time, the instinctive fear that Atsu showed when it saw White Lotus had completely disappeared. Instead, this big black dog seemed to be very annoyed. It bared its teeth and growled at White Lotus, and even showed its fangs. It looked very angry, as if it couldn't wait to pounce on this beautiful girl to vent its anger. White Lotus probably didn't expect Atsu's expression and attitude to change so suddenly. She was stunned and said to Luchan, "What's wrong with you, stupid dog?" Luchan reached out and stroked Atsu's head. After thinking for a while, he said, probably angry out of shame, "White Lotus, holy beasts were powerful monsters." After advancing, they almost had no natural enemies, and there were not many enemies in the world that they were afraid of. Therefore, the sudden fear just now made Atsu very angry and annoyed. It felt that there was no need for it to be afraid of White Lotus at all. It felt that it had embarrassed itself. Therefore, for the rest of the journey, this big black dog no longer had a good attitude towards the beautiful girl, White Lotus. However, humans were heartless. None of the three people present would run to comfort this suddenly angry black dog. At most, Luchan gently stroked its head a few times. At the same time, his attention was still on White Lotus. "Why are you here?" Luchan asked White Lotus. White Lotus shrugged and said, "I was ordered to come here." As she said that, she turned to face Olma and took out a sealed envelope from her arms. She asked Olma, "Are you Ma Xiaoyan?" Old Ma nodded and said yes. As he said that, he took out a piece of jade from his arms and handed it to White Lotus. White Lotus took it and looked at it carefully. Then, she nodded and handed it to Old Ma along with the envelope in her hand. Old Ma took the jade and put it away first. Then, he directly opened the envelope and read the letter inside carefully. Then, he nodded and said, "That's right. But in the letter, Lord Perfected Immortal ordered me to go with Luchan to the Immortal City. I will go with you." White Lotus grunted and did not seem to care. Her clear and lively eyes looked at Luchan and said, "Let's go." Luchan smiled and said, "Okay, let's go. How have you been these few years?" Luchan asked White Lotus. White Lotus said, "It's not bad. My biggest backer, Master, died, and in the end, I found an even more powerful Uncle Master. I don't know how many people inside and outside the sect are envious of me." As she said that, she smiled at Luchan and said, "What about you? I'm quite unlucky." Luchan said honestly, "After you left, Atsu and I also went south to escape into the depths of the land of chaos. Our days were miserable, and we only came back recently." White Lotus looked like she didn't believe it. She pointed at Atsu and said, "You must be talking nonsense. This stupid dog is 10 times fatter than before. How can it look like it's living a miserable life? This is obviously the appearance of a well-fed dog." Roar! Atsu let out a low growl and extended its fangs. It looked like it was trying to bite off White Lotus's white and delicate finger. White Lotus giggled as she retracted her finger. She didn't seem angry at all. She said to Luchan, "This dog's temper has grown. I don't remember it being this angry when it was with you." Luchan smiled and said, "Atsu is not like this usually. He is probably in a bad mood today." White Lotus thought about it and nodded without saying anything. Luchan changed the topic, and at the same time, he asked about the doubts in his heart. He said, "What about you? What's the situation now?" It seems like you're doing very well in the Kunlun party. Even that true Lord Tianlon treats you differently. White Lotus curled her lips and said, "It's just so-so. There is nothing to boast about." Lu Chen asked, "Shouldn't you be on the Kunlun mountain in the Westland? Why did you come to the Immortal City and were sent to pick me up?" White Lotus said, "My martial uncle Tianlon insisted that I follow him, and then he suddenly told me to come to pick you up not long ago." Speaking of this, White Lotus suddenly smiled and said, "But I really did not expect that the person who can make a perfected cultivator of Huashan realm miss you and make me come to pick you up in person is actually you." Lu Chen said with a smile, "That's really hard for you." White Lotus looked into his eyes, but there was no smile in her eyes. After staring at Lu Chen for a long time, she suddenly said, "Who are you?" Lu Chen said, "I'm a former handyman disciple of the Kunlun party. You can't have forgotten this, can you?" White Lotus snorted and said, "What kind of handyman disciple can make a perfected cultivator of Huashan realm remember him and send someone to pick him up? There must be an important reason for him to think so highly of someone." Lu Chen smiled and said nothing. He just walked forward with Atsu. After a while, suddenly, White Lotus's voice sounded a little cold. She said, "Lu Chen, were you a spy that perfected cultivator Tianlon personally placed in the Kunlun party to inquire about information in the Kunlun mountain and do a lot of evil things? For example, my master and my eldest brother." Lu Chen's expression did not change. He still looked gentle and polite. He smiled at White Lotus and said, "No, I don't know the person you're talking about, so these things have nothing to do with me." "Really?" White Lotus looked a little suspicious. "Really?" Lu Chen said with a smile and a nod. He looked very relaxed, and there was no trace of lying. Chapter 385. What do you think of White Lotus as a person? This was the first question Lu Chen asked Old Ma when they chatted privately that night after they rested for the night. Because of safety concerns, they did not enter the cities and towns along the way, but directly slept in the wild. Fortunately, sleeping in the wild was not difficult for cultivators like them. At night, because of the difference between men and women, and because White Lotus was also a neat freak, or because she was not used to being too close to others, she hid far away and slept. Old Ma glanced at White Lotus in the distance. After making sure that she could not eavesdrop on his conversation with Lu Chen, he lowered his voice and said, "It's okay. At least on the surface, she is good to us. As for more, this is the first day we met, so we can't see it." Lu Chen nodded slowly. After a moment, he said, "Didn't she say that the damn Baldy always kept her by his side? Why did he let her come out alone to pick us up this time?" Old Ma shrugged and moved his fat body lying on the ground to make himself more comfortable. At the same time, he said, "No one knows. I think that besides Lord Immortal and White Lotus herself, there is probably no third person who can completely understand the relationship between them. However, since you asked this, I think that this time White Lotus came to pick us up, at least two things are clear." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and moved closer to Old Ma. He asked with interest, "Oh, what two things? Tell me." Old Ma said lightly, "First, Lord Immortal believes in her. Or it can be said that he has great confidence that White Lotus will not betray him, so he can let her come out alone to pick us up. Second, Lord Immortal values you very much, but he only secretly sent White Lotus for such an important matter. This means that this girl's cultivation is absolutely not what it used to be, and her strength must be abnormally strong. That is why Lord Immortal trusts her so much." Lu Chen was deep in thought. Old Ma looked at him and said with some bad intentions, "What? Are you afraid? In the past, Lord Immortal valued you so much, but you did not pay attention to him. Now that such a genius has suddenly appeared out of nowhere, do you know to be nervous?" Lu Chen also laughed, shook his head, and looked at White Lotus in the distance. He saw that the girl was sleeping with her clothes on and seemed to have fallen asleep. He was silent for a moment and said, "Damn Baldy, this person is extremely intelligent, far-sighted, and sophisticated. He is close to a demigod, but not like a human, so it is very difficult to use ordinary people's point of view to guess him. In my opinion, At least in the current world, there is no one that he deeply trusts. This White Lotus is also the same. She is not qualified. Olma did not seem to agree with Lu Chen's words. He sneered and said, "Look at what you said as if it is true. Then tell me, in the end, how can one be considered as Lord Immortal's considerate person?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "It's very simple. That damnable Baldy officially takes someone as a disciple and passes down the heaven character Taoist title passed down from generation to that person. That person is someone that he truly regards highly and fosters with all his heart." Tian Taoist name? Old Ma seemed to be stunned for a moment. After a while, he said, "If it is to accept a disciple, White Lotus should be very promising. After all, her talent is too good. She is a rare 5-pillar genius. Even Hakushin Jinquan made an exception and accepted her as his last disciple." Lu Chen sneered and said, "Damn Baldy is not his dead senior brother, let alone him. In short, remember what I said, in the eyes of Damn Baldy, everyone is probably the same as an ant. The most important thing is whether they are useful or not. As for saying that there is hope with him as a 5-pillar genius, I don't know if White Lotus believes in this, but that is a lie." As he said this, Lu Chen looked up at the dark sky and slowly said, "What is 5 pillars? It is necessary to use them." The journey was very smooth and there were no accidents. After a few days, they safely arrived at the Yingxing River outside the Immortal City. From afar, they could already see the huge city in the vast and fertile Four Rivers plain in the distance. The Immortal City was now the well-deserved #1 city in the vast land of the Divine Land, especially after Xingxiameng settled here 1,000 years ago and put in effort to manage it. Until today, the prosperity of the Immortal City increased day by day. It attracted countless talents from aristocratic families and became the center of the land of the vast land. Unlike most of the cities in the vast land of the Divine Land, the Immortal City here, although there was the word city, there are no city walls. Countless buildings and palaces were built on this fertile land, forming a vast city that could not be seen at a glance. Here, people did not need the protection of the city walls, because the Immortal City itself was the most powerful force in the world. The Immortal City was backed by a mountain on one side and water on 3 sides. The 4 most famous rivers in the Four Rivers plain flowed through this huge city. In the early ancient times, it was said that there was an ancient relic here. Today, in the Immortal City, some remnants of the relic could occasionally be seen in some corners. Among them, the most eye-catching were of course in the east, south, west, and north directions. There was a magnificent giant statue carved with the legendary azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise. These 4 statues of the holy beasts were all standing with their backs facing the distance. Because of the long years, there were many wear and tear, but the boundless aura still remained. Over the years, it gradually became a famous scenery in the city. When outsiders came to the Immortal City to play, most of them would come down here to admire it. But other than that, the legends about the relic have been passed down for many years. There are all kinds of sayings. For example, there were ancient demons under the Immortal City or treasures of heaven and earth in the depths of the relic, and so on. There were many kinds. However, it was generally accepted that the ruins were extremely dangerous and had caused the deaths of many people. For the sake of safety, several deity transformation stage perfected lords of the previous generation of the true Immortal Alliance cast a spell together to seal all the entrances to the ancient ruins. Since then, there were no more demons or ghosts in the Immortal City. Xingxiameng did his best to manage this place, and also made the Immortal City develop with each passing day. Many years later, the Immortal City was divided into the Upper City and the Lower City. The so-called Upper City specifically referred to the Azure Dragon District where the Azure Dragon statue was located. This area was located halfway up the Sky Dragon Mountain, and the terrain was at least 100 meters higher than the other districts. It was different from the other districts and had been directly expropriated by Xingxiameng long ago. Now, Almost all the high-level people in Zhengxiaming lived here. In addition, the other 3 districts, namely White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, and Black Tortoise, were all on flat ground. They were inferior to the Azure Dragon district in terms of majesty, but far more prosperous and lively. For many years, hundreds of millions of creatures lived in this big city named Immortal, and spent every day full of hope and surprises. Before we enter the city, I have something to say to you. On the bank of Yingxing River, White Lotus pulled Lu Chun and said to him. Old Ma, who was beside her, also stopped. Lu Chun said, "What is it? It's not convenient to bring this dog in." White Lotus pointed at Atsu, very calmly. Recently, someone in the city is killing dogs. Well, Lu Chun nodded and said, Old Ma told me about this before, but I don't think it's a big problem. After all, the damn Baldy's identity and status are extraordinary. It's not a big deal to protect a dog. Woof! Atsu barked next to him, seeming to be a little happy. White Lotus shook her head and said, It's not a good idea. It always causes trouble for Martial Uncle Tianlon. You can leave it outside the city. Anyway, when we were in Kunlun Mountain, Atsu also ran around all day. It shouldn't get lost. Lu Chen's face changed slightly, and then he shook his head and said, No. White Lotus was stunned and said in surprise, What? Chapter 386. Lu Chun looked at the immortal city from afar, looking at the almost endless bustling scene of Mount Tianlong. Even though he was far away now, he seemed to be able to feel the hustle and bustle there. There's so many people here. It's hard to count the number of dogs, or stray dogs, without owners. I'm afraid it will be very difficult for the people under you to give the order to kill dogs, right? White Lotus shrugged and looked indifferent. She said, Who cares? Anyway, I don't raise dogs. Besides, he is a perfected cultivator in the Huashan realm. He has high cultivation, high status, and power. He could do whatever he wants. Why should he care about what your people do? Well, what you said is very reasonable. Lu Chen smiled, then turned back to Old Ma and said, Since it's not good to take Atsu into the city, I won't go in. Go back and tell the damn Baldy to come out to see me, okay? Old Ma was a little stunned for a moment and didn't know what to say. White Lotus, who was next to him, was also shocked. After a while, she frowned and said, What nonsense are you talking about? Martial Uncle Tianlon is a person of high status. It's already a great honor for him to see you. How can he condescend to come out of the city to see you? Lu Chen ignored her. He just looked at Old Ma and said, Old Ma, you know what's going on. Does he want to see me, or do I want to see him? Old Ma gave a wry smile and said, Well, it's him who wants to see you. White Lotus looked unhappy and said, Even if Martial Uncle Tianlon wants to see you, isn't it a matter of course for you to pay a visit to him, given his status? Lu Chen smiled and reached out to touch Atsu, who was standing next to him. He said, This time I don't want to follow this matter of course. Go back and tell the damn Baldy that I'll wait here tonight. If I don't come tonight, I'll leave tomorrow. How dare you? Before Old Ma could answer, White Lotus had already shouted at him. But then the beautiful girl suddenly rolled her eyes, and the original anger suddenly disappeared. She looked at Lu Chun with some suspicion and said, Who are you? Why are you so fearless in the face of a perfected cultivator in the Huashan realm? Aren't you afraid that the perfected cultivator will be furious and turn you into powder in an instant? Lu Chun nodded and said, Yes, I'm very scared. After saying that, he turned around and walked towards a small forest not far away. Black Dog Atu was about to follow when it suddenly turned around and glared fiercely at Old Ma and White Lotus. It let out a low growl and bared its fangs as it shook its head threateningly. Then it swung its tail and trotted after Lu Chun. White Lotus was furious and was about to scold him, but she suddenly heard Old Ma cry out, Hey, Atsu! Why are you being so fierce to me? It's not like I'm the one who's unhappy with you. White Lotus's words were about to come out of her mouth, but she was choked back by this guy's words. She turned around and glared at Old Ma, saying, How can you say that? This person is disrespectful to the perfected cultivator. Is it wrong for us to scold him? That's right. Old Ma immediately replied seriously, then turned around and walked toward the immortal city. At the same time, he said, "Let's go back and pay our respects to the perfected cultivator and ask him to make a decision. It would be best if he could kill this guy in his anger and vent my anger." White Lotus followed him and looked at Old Ma suspiciously. She said, "Really? But you seem to be very familiar with this Lu Chun?" Old Ma sneered and shook his head repeatedly. He said, "Miss, you've misunderstood me. This guy's been an eyesore to me for more than 10 years. If I'm lucky enough to meet the perfected cultivator later, you'll see what I say to him." Oh, White Lotus couldn't figure out the relationship between the two men for a while, so she stopped talking and followed Old Ma to the immortal city. She occasionally looked back. Lu Chun, who was a little mysterious in her heart, seemed to have become more and more vague now. He was like a vague and indistinguishable shadow in the night. Zhengxiameng was the most powerful cultivation organization among the human clan in the vast land of the Divine Land. In terms of strength alone, it had long surpassed any single cultivation sect in the past. It could even be said that in the history of the human clan, there had never been something like Zhengxiameng. But its strength, at least for now, was an unquestionable fact. Zhengxiameng controlled the immortal city, which was second to none in the world. The 6 perfected cultivators and the immortal allies were the supreme leaders of this powerful organization, Zhengxiameng, so they naturally occupied the best things in this city. The Azure Dragon District on the Sky Dragon Mountain was undoubtedly the best place in the immortal city of the 4 major districts, marked by the statues of the 4 sacred beasts in the mysterious ruins left behind in the ancient times. The Azure Dragon District on the Sky Dragon Mountain was undoubtedly the best place in the immortal city of the 4 districts, marked by the statues of the 4 sacred beasts in the mysterious ruins left behind in the ancient times. The headquarters of Zhengxiameng was located here. The entire Azure Dragon District was the territory of Zhengxiameng, and the 6 perfected cultivators had also taken the best pieces of land here as their residences. Perfected Tianlan once returned to his own sect, the Kunlun Party, a few years ago. Many things happened on the way home, and there were many different opinions, but the final result was still in front of everyone. Whether they accepted it or not, it was the same. After that, Perfected Tianlan stayed on the Kunlun Mountain for more than a year. Although there were many rumors in the outside world that he wanted to settle the hearts of the people in the Kunlun Party and eliminate the dissidents, he did not neglect the affairs of Zhengxiameng, and there were no problems with remote control. After this period of time, Perfected Tianlan once again set out on his journey to the immortal city. However, this time, under the surface of calmness, there were many undercurrents surging in Zhengxiameng. This was because from that time on, many disciples of the Kunlun Party joined Zhengxiameng under various names and began to work for Perfected Tianlan. The Kunlun Party was one of the 5 famous sects in the world, and there were many outstanding talents in the sect. Therefore, gradually, the strength of Perfected Tianlan's sect suddenly increased, and its momentum also became more and more prosperous. Old Ma and White Lotus met Perfected Tianlan at noon that day. The super fatty, who was much fatter than Old Ma and of course much more burly, sat in his cave residence, passing shadow, and listened to what they had to say about Lu Chun. Perfected Tianlan's expression was like an ancient well, without any changes. When he turned to look down, he saw 2 people standing there. White Lotus frowned slightly, and there seemed to be a little anger on her face, while Old Ma looked down like an old monk in meditation, as if nothing had anything to do with him. Perfected Tianlan shook his head, turned to White Lotus, and smiled. He said gently, "You've worked hard on this journey. Go and rest. I'll deal with the rest, so you don't have to worry about it." White Lotus took a step forward and said, "Martial Uncle, I think this person named Lu Chun is very strange. What's his background? How dare he be so arrogant and disrespectful to you?" Perfected Tianlan snorted and said, "This guy is rebellious and bold, so I must punish him severely. All right, you can go now." White Lotus wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought, and there seemed to be a trace of confusion in her eyes. But in the end, she bowed and left the cave residence. At this time, there were only perfected Tianlan and Old Ma left in the cave residence. They looked at each other, and perfected Tianlan suddenly said, "What did that brat say?" Old Ma coughed and said, "Lu Chun asked me to send his regards to you, and he said that it's not that he doesn't want to go up the mountain, but bullsh asterisk T." Perfected Tianlan suddenly interrupted Old Ma impatiently and said, "That brat is used to being arrogant and detestable. He even dares to scold me in front of me. So how could he be so polite behind my back? Tell me the truth, what he said." Old Ma gave a hollow laugh and secretly looked at perfected Tianlan's expression, not daring to hide it anymore. He could only say, "Well, Your Excellency, Lu Chun is still young." Before he finished his words, he saw perfected Tianlan's expression change again. Old Ma's heart skipped a beat, and he did not dare to argue anymore. He hurriedly said, "Go back and tell the damn Baldy that I'll wait here for a night, and if I don't come tonight, I'll leave tomorrow." After saying that, Old Ma only felt a chill on his back. He could not help but subconsciously look at perfected Tianlan's shiny skull in front of him, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. There was silence in the cave residence. Old Ma did not dare to look at perfected Tianlan's expression, and he even subconsciously held his breath. After a while, perfected Tianlan suddenly snorted and said, "It does sound like what that brat said. He's simply reckless, audacious, and rebellious." After saying those words in a serious tone that made Old Ma's expression change, perfected Tianlan stood up and walked out of the cave residence. At the same time, he calmed down and said to Old Ma, "Let's go and see that good-for-nothing guy." Old Ma said, "Ah." Chapter 387. The small forest where Lu Chan and Atsu stayed was actually some distance away from the Immortal City, and it was also far away from the busy official roads. It was a very secluded place. When night fell, the huge city in the distance was brightly lit, while the forest here was dark and gloomy, as if they were two different worlds. Lu Chan sat quietly in the forest, his figure almost integrated with the surrounding darkness, looking like a vague shadow in the night, indistinct and difficult to distinguish. Atsu lay quietly beside him, a pair of dark green eyes shimmering in the darkness. Occasionally, it would look up at the sky, as if there was something it was interested in the boundless sky. The night was quiet, and there was no other sound except the sound of the night wind blowing through the treetops. But the city in the distance was too big and too prosperous. Even at such a distance, Lu Chun could still feel the invisible aura emitted from that place. That was the place that all the cultivators in the world yearned for. At this time, suddenly footsteps came from outside the forest, and then a fat and burly figure appeared in their sight. The person who came was Supreme Tianlan. However, with Supreme Tianlan's cultivation realm, if he really wanted to hide from their eyes and ears, he would naturally have countless means and divine sense to get close without being noticed. But this damn Baldy didn't seem to want to do so, and he walked directly over. Perhaps he even increased his pace to remind Lu Chun of the fact that he had come here. Lu Chun stood up and looked behind Supreme Tianlan, who was slowly walking over, but found that there was no one behind Supreme Tianlan. He was startled and slightly frowned. Tianlan walked to Lu Chun, his face calm, and his eyes deep, but in the end, a trace of complex light flashed across. After a moment, he smiled and said, "Long time no see." Lu Chun sighed, and his mood was a little complicated. The person in front of him had always been entangled with his fate in the first half of his life. He was indebted to him, but it seemed that he had betrayed his former friendship. He fled to the chaotic land and finally fell into the southern wilderness. In fact, it was not a short time, but not too long either. From the beginning to the end, it was only a few years. But at this moment, under the night sky, beside the bustling city, when he saw this person again, Lu Chun still felt a sense of vicissitudes in his heart. "Long time no see." Lu Chun also nodded. Tianlong looked at Lu Chen up and down, then glanced at Atu beside him, the black dog that was unusually large and looked like a giant wolf demonic beast 100 times larger than an ordinary dog. Tianlong's gaze suddenly paused for a moment, as if he was slightly surprised. He looked at it a few more times, but then he turned away and looked at Lu Chen again. "Where's old Ma?" Chen asked. "Oh, he's waiting outside the woods," Tianlong said. "I think it's more casual for us to talk this time, just the two of us, so don't let him follow us in." Speaking of this, Tianlong smiled and said, "In the end, little Ma is just a messenger between the two of us. In the end, we still have to say what we want to say, don't we? Or could it be that you've been with him for so long that you actually trust him more than me?" Lu Chen's heart suddenly shrank, but his expression did not change. Without a moment of hesitation or pause, he shook his head and said, "Of course not." Tianlong chuckled and casually waved his wide robe sleeve. A gust of wind swept past, immediately blowing away the fallen leaves and dust in the woods, revealing a cleaner space. Then, this perfected lord of the divine transformation realm, who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world, actually did not take it to heart. He casually sat down in front of Lu Chen and at the same time called out to Lu Chen, Come, sit down and talk. It's so tiring to stand." This damn bald fatty would not feel tired even if he stood for a year. Lu Chen secretly criticized in his heart. Then he still sat down and said, "I heard from old Ma that it was you who wanted to see me?" "Yes." Perfected Lord Tianlong nodded and said, "That's right. I haven't heard from you for several years. I only know that you escaped into the depths of the land of chaos and finally fell into the Longchuan River. So when I heard that you suddenly came back, of course I wanted to see you." Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Then he looked up at Tianlong and said, "All these years, you always thought that I was dead, right?" Tianlong shook his head and said, "No, I always believed that you were still alive." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You actually have so much confidence in me. It's hard for an ordinary person to come back alive after falling into the river." Tianlong said lightly, "You're someone that I personally taught. How can you be an ordinary person?" Lu Chen was stunned and did not say anything. Tianlong continued, "Moreover, if I didn't believe that you were still alive, do you think I would allow He to live well, just because I force you to die?" Lu Chen was slightly surprised and said, "He?" Perfected Lord Tianlong said, "Hunting you down is a great achievement. You can't possibly think that he would hide it from you, right? He told me everything from the beginning to the end. He even wanted to take me as his master and inherit my Taoism." Lu Chen's expression became somewhat complicated. At that moment, he did not seem to know what to say. Finally, he smiled bitterly and said, "Then what did you do with him in the end?" Perfected Lord Tianlong said calmly, "I told him that he did a good job, but it was still not enough for him to inherit my Taoism. I told him to cultivate more diligently. At the same time, I also transferred him from Kunlun Mountain to Zhangxiaming to work for me. Now he can be considered as one of my generals." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Good move." Perfected Lord Tianlong snorted and said, "What move? It sounds like you're a little disdainful about it. Let's not talk about anything else. He didn't have any complaints at all and treated me like a talent scout. In order to strive for the top, his diligence and vigor are much stronger than yours." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I know, I also had that vigor before, but it was almost worn away when I was in the devil cult more than 10 years ago." A trace of anger suddenly flashed across Perfected Lord Tianlong's face. He stared at Lu Chen, and the darkness around his fat body seemed to suddenly surge, like a demon beast suddenly roaring in the dark void. But very soon, Tianlong seemed to think of something again. His gaze on Lu Chen gradually softened. After a while, he sighed softly. "Do you still blame me?" Tianlong asked Lu Chen. "No." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "In the first few years when I was burned to death by the black fire, I was indeed a little dissatisfied with you. But later, I gradually got over it. If you hadn't saved me back then, I wouldn't be where I am now. So, just take it as me repaying your kindness." Tianlong stared at him and said, You've really gotten over it? If there's anything in your heart that you're unhappy about, you might as well tell me. Lu Chan said, I've gotten over it. Anyway, those things are in the past. But he paused and looked up at Tianlan, saying, this time, I do have a few things to ask you. Go ahead. Lu Chen paused and said, Su Qingjun, and how is the Su family in Kanwa City now? Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him indifferently. After a while, he suddenly smiled. His smile was gentle, but there was a hint of coldness in his eyes. Chapter 388. There was a moment of silence in the forest. Lu Chen raised his head slightly and looked at Tianlan. After a while, Tianlan said, Didn't you ask Little Ma about this before you came? Lu Chen said, I did, but Old Ma didn't tell me much. He only said a few words and didn't want to say more. I think he was afraid that I would find out something and get angry. Maybe he wouldn't come to Immortal City and would run to Kunlun Mountain out of anger. Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a while. Then he laughed and said, It's funny, but thinking about Little Ma, it might really be possible. Lu Chen smiled and said, That's why I thought I'd come and ask you myself. Tianlan nodded and said, Su Qingjun is a good girl. Back then, that incident caused a storm in the city. There were people in the Su family and Kunlun sect who blamed and criticized her. She didn't defend herself and just took it. In the past few years, she only focused on cultivation and made great progress. If there are no accidents, it shouldn't be a problem for her to easily reach the Yuanying realm. Lu Chan was silent for a while, and then said, It seems that she's not far from the truth to be able to get such a comment from you, a perfected lord of soul formation. Tianlan smiled and didn't say anything. His expression was calm, as if what he said just now was a matter of course, and had unshakable confidence. For what you said just now, the Su family seems to have a big reaction. Lu Chun asked again. Of course. Tianlan snorted and said, Back then, you went crazy and directly rushed into their mansion and killed Sumo in front of so many people. How do you think the Su family will react? Lu Chan said expressionlessly, I didn't kill wrongly and I don't regret it. Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand casually and said after a while, Yes, you're right. The Su family was so angry that they wanted to get to the bottom of this. After you escaped, the Su family was not willing to let you go. They went back to the faction to investigate you. Not only did they want to investigate your background, but they also wanted to find out how you entered the Kunlun party. They wanted to get to the bottom of it. They probably wanted to find your relatives and family by following the vines. Hearing this, Lu Chen's expression became strange. Even though he never liked the Su family, the only exception was probably Su Qingjun. However, upon hearing perfected Lord Tianlan's words, Lu Chen still had an indescribable sense of absurdity. How did he join the Kunlun party? It was arranged by perfected Lord Tianlan. What background does he have? Does he have a backer? Of course, the most powerful deity in the Kunlun sect was his backer. In the eyes of those who knew the inside story, the Su family's aggressive investigation was really a bit suicidal. Then how did you stop them from investigating? Lu Chen asked. Was it troublesome? Tianlan snorted and said, Of course it was troublesome. You're the only one who knows how to make trouble. But it's just like that. I just made some arrangements so that they couldn't investigate further. Then what did you do to the Su family? Lu Chen looked at Tianlan with an inquiring look in his eyes. Tianlan said, I didn't do anything to them. I've been reorganizing the faction these years and didn't want to get involved. But Old Ma told me about the grievances you suffered in the Su family. I just wanted to wait for you to come back and see what you think. Lu Chan was silent for a moment and said, Is it important what I think? How you deal with the Su family depends on me. Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, Well, it's up to you. No matter what, you're mine. Since you suffered in their hands, it's only right for me to take revenge. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched, and he lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he said calmly, Forget it. The only one in the Su family who really hated me was Sumo, and he was killed by me. The others didn't have much to do with me, but Su Qingjun had a good relationship with me in that year. Let's stop this matter. Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes flickered and he said, let's stop here. Lu Chen nodded and said, yes, let's stop here. Don't get others involved. Okay, you said you had a few things to ask me. What about the other things? Tianlan asked. Lu Chen didn't know why, but when he looked at this fat and burly man, his original mood suddenly became a little bleak. He couldn't lift his spirits and felt more helpless. He was silent for a long time and then said with a wry smile, forget it. I suddenly don't want to talk about other things. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him and didn't get angry at Lu Chen's words. It seemed that this high-ranking perfected lord of Huashan realm did have a whole new level of respect for the young man in front of him. He even seemed to know Lu Chen very well and was particularly tolerant of Lu Chen. He even said a few more words to Lu Chen. By the way, I also know about Exine. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly, and he looked up. Tianlan said, the girl's body was taken back by her family and given a proper burial. I also asked the Kunlun sect to put in some effort to arrange a grand funeral for her. Let's just take it as us making it up to her a little. Lu Chen took a deep breath and then slowly stood up and said, when Exine was alive, she didn't seem to like this kind of thing very much. But I know her intention, and I think Exine's parents can also feel it. I thank you on behalf of that unfortunate girl. After saying that, he straightened his expression and solemnly bowed to perfected Lord Tianlan, and then said, if Exine knows in the underworld, she will definitely want me to thank you on her behalf. Perfected Lord Tianlan calmly accepted the bow. When Lu Chen straightened up again, he said, whether you still want to ask or not, since I'm here tonight, I naturally want to have a good talk with you. If you said everything you want to know and know everything you want to know, then it's my turn to say it now, right? Lu Chen nodded and said, go ahead. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, come back and help me. Lu Chen paused for a moment and then said with a wry smile, with your power and strength, what kind of talent can't you find? Why do you insist on me coming back? Perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly, there are many people who want to help me, but I can't think of anyone else who is worthy of my complete trust and can be entrusted with such important matters by me. Lu Chen coughed and said, I've been listening to this kind of flattery for 10 years. I've long known that it's just a big empty pie in the sky. Don't lie to me. Perfected Lord Tianlan said with a smile, I'm not lying to you. I'm telling the truth. Lu Chen shook his head and said, I heard from Old Ma that you've recently transferred many young experts from the Kunlun party over, and half of them have joined Fuyunji. These people are of the same lineage as you, so you can trust them in everything they do. Tianlan said, those people are passable, but I still can't trust them completely. And this time, there's one thing I still only trust in you. Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, a bitter expression appeared on his face, and he said, the devil cult again? Yes, Tianlan said, it's the devil cult again. It has to be you. Bullsh *T. Lu Chen scolded. Last time in Kunlun Mountain, you also said the same thing to me. In the end, there were only a few people from the devil cult on Kunlun Mountain. Instead, it was your two perfected lords and several major factions that were fighting among themselves. I'm not going to join the fun. Chapter 389. Perfected Lord Tianlan paused for a moment and suddenly looked a little embarrassed, but he soon recovered and said to Lu Chen with a smile, that was an accident. You know what an accident means, right? Originally, I asked you to go there to track down the spy in the Kunlun party, but then an opportunity suddenly appeared for me to reorganize the Kunlun party. Do you think I should do it or not? Lu Chen sneered and said, after saying so much, where is the spy of the devil cult? Have you found him or not? Not yet. Perfected Lord Tianlan answered honestly. Indeed, I haven't found him yet. Actually, if you didn't cause so much trouble, such as directly rushing to the Su family to kill people, I still want you to continue to go back to Kunlun Mountain to help me find him. TSK. This time, Lu Chen didn't even bother to say anything and directly rolled his eyes at him. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and said, Let's forget about these things. It's all in the past after all. What's your plan now? The corner of Lu Chen's eye twitched, and he said, just don't bother me. I'll find a place to eat and wait for my death. It's very comfortable. Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, that's too much of a pity. Others can't learn your skills at all. Lu Chen sneered and said, what's there to pity? This deadly skill, whoever wants it can take it. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and looked at Lu Chen very gently, like a father looking at a naughty child. After a while, he said, don't be anxious, listen to me. Lu Chen shrugged and sat down on the ground indifferently. Although his expression was as usual, it was not that he didn't have those complicated emotions in his heart. In fact, sometimes, even he himself did not quite understand how he felt when facing this damned baldy who had raised him since he was young and taught him all the skills. Respect, worship, resentment, anger, trust, or doubt. There seemed to be something in every kind of feeling. When he followed Old Ma to the Immortal City from King Shutang village this time, before he really saw Tianlan, Lu Chen was actually a little nervous and perturbed. Because until today, he still couldn't see and understand this damn baldy clearly. Is he good or bad? Did he really believe her, or was he just using her with his flowery words? Lu Chen felt that these matters were shrouded in clouds and mist, and he couldn't see through them clearly. I really believe you. Perfected Lord Tianlan's calm voice came from the darkness ahead. There was no fluctuation of emotion, as if what he said was the most natural thing in the world. You know, in the past few decades, I founded the Fuyun Agency and gathered many talents to do the most important thing, which is to deal with the devil cult. But the demons of the devil cult are too cunning. After they can't beat us, they hide in the dark and play all kinds of tricks. Even now, a lot of them have infiltrated into Zhengxiameng. It's very troublesome. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, I heard from Old Ma that even your subordinates in Fuyunji have caught a few devil cult spies. Perfected Lord Tianlan sneered and said, isn't that so? Even the organization I specially set up to deal with the devil cult has been infiltrated by the demons of the devil cult. That's why I said that the idiots of Zhengxiameng have cultivated too much that even their brains have been damaged. Nowadays, the devil cult only looks weak on the surface, but it is everywhere in the dark and has far-reaching influence. Maybe its real strength is far beyond our imagination. If we don't attack it, I'm afraid a big disaster is right in front of us. Lu Chen was silent. Tianlan glanced at him and said, I've said something similar to you before. Today, I might as well say it to you again. In dealing with the devil cult, I really only trust you. Because everyone in the world may be a spy of the devil cult, but only you are not. Come back and help me. Tianlan said slowly, word by word. Lu Chen sat in the dark, quiet and silent. At this time, it was already late at night, and there was almost no light in the woods. Their figures had long been integrated into the surrounding darkness. He couldn't see Tianlan clearly and didn't know if Tianlan could really see him clearly. I still don't really want to do it. After a long time, Lu Chen broke the silence and said, I always have a feeling that I've been doing the same thing all my life, and it seems that this thing can never be finished. I'm a little annoyed. Tianlan nodded slightly in the dark. After a while, he said, then what do you want to do? Lu Chen said, I've said it before. Find a place to eat and wait for death. Well, I've worked hard for you for more than 10 years. In exchange for the rest of my life, it's not too much, right? Tianlan seemed to be amused by his words. He chuckled and then sighed, saying, it's not too much, not too much. For some reason, the more they talked face to face like this, the calmer Lu Chen felt. Although he had not completely abandoned the suspicion he once had, it had gradually weakened a lot. This person he had watched grow up, the person he once saw as a father, this tall and burly figure, perhaps his position in his heart was even greater and more deep-rooted than he had imagined. Of course, you can choose to hide and eat and wait for death. I won't force you, nor will I break my promise. Lord Tianlan said lightly in the dark, but I think you should also know that some things can't be done as you like. You're still young, and your cultivation and talent are not bad. In the future, you'll probably live longer than me. But once I die, or when the devil cult's strength suddenly rises again, as long as they seize the place of Fiyunji, they can find a lot of things. At that time, it won't be difficult to find your hiding place. Lu Chun snorted coldly but didn't say anything. Tianlan looked at him and said, as long as the devil cult is not destroyed, even if you hide, you won't feel at ease. I'm telling the truth. Destroy, destroy, destroy. You only know how to destroy the devil cult. Lu Chan suddenly became a little angry and said to Tianlan with a trace of anger, it's been more than 10 or 20 years, and you still say the same thing. But how to destroy it? During the Battle of the Barren Valley, we've done so much, but the devil cult still hasn't been destroyed. After so many years, it's still like a ghost. You also said that there's a secret in Kunlun Mountain, but we've searched around and still found nothing. Then tell me, what should I do to completely get rid of this disgusting and ferocious devil cult? Tianlan was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he smiled and said in a gentle voice, why? It seems that you're very annoyed by this matter. Nonsense. I've been pestered by this matter for more than 10 or 20 years, and I've been worried about dying a violent death every day. Who wouldn't be annoyed? Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, you're right. Actually, I've thought about all of these before. Recently, I've suddenly realized something. We definitely have to destroy the devil cult. However, the direction that we've been taking in the past might not be right. Lu Chen glanced at him and said, what do you mean? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, previously we always wanted to get rid of those important figures in the devil cult, thinking that we could destroy the devil cult by killing all of these ambitious demons. But the truth shows that this method is not effective. The demons of the devil cult are always like weeds, popping up in waves. But later, I suddenly thought of a key point that might be able to destroy the devil cult once and for all. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan and said after a while, is there really such a way? Yes. What is it? Tianlan smiled in the darkness. The darkness shrouded him, making his tall figure look like a devil in the darkness, terrifying and terrifying. The divine tree. After saying that, Perfected Lord Tianlan became indifferent again and said, that thing has been the source of the devil cult's belief for thousands of years. As long as we find a way to destroy it, the devil cult will naturally collapse, right? Lu Chan suddenly fell into silence and did not say a word for a long time. Chapter 390. What do you think? Tianlan asked, probably seeing that Lu Chen did not speak for a long time. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, I thought the tree of God of the devil cult is the same as the gods and other myths and legends. They're all illusory things that do not exist in the world. Tianlan smiled and said, in the legends of the devil cult, the real tree of God is a divine object that has existed since the beginning of the world. Not only is it indomitable, but it can also cross the heavens and the earth and give birth to all things. It is the origin of all living things in the world. You should have heard of these myths in the devil cult, right? Lu Chen nodded and said, yes, this is the fundamental belief of the devil cult demons. Of course I know about it. However, in the devil cult, there is always a part that cannot be justified. That is, from the beginning to the end, from the birth of the devil cult until now, no one has really seen the appearance of the tree of God in this world. There are only extravagant myths that can only deceive those who have no brains. A glimmer of light flashed across Tianlan's eyes. He looked at Lu Chen and asked with a smile, you don't believe it? Lu Chen said, I don't believe it. Lord Tianlan nodded and seemed to be quite satisfied with Lu Chen's attitude. He then said, this thing is naturally insignificant to us, but for the demons of the devil cult, it is a very important matter. In addition, I heard that in the devil cult, there is the so-called branch, leaf seed. Do you know about it? Lu Chen's heart suddenly jumped, but he looked as usual. After thinking for a moment, he said, it is probably the one branch, two leaves, one seed that they say. The people of the devil cult said that these four treasures are the remains of the tree of God left in this world. At the same time, there is another saying that as long as these 4 divine objects are gathered and the secret method passed down from the Devil Cult era is used to perform the summoning ceremony, the door of Void Realm can be opened and the Tree of God will be summoned back to this world. Ridiculous. Perfected Lord Tanlan sneered with a disdainful look on his face and said, "This statement sounds very far-fetched. Even if it's true, those idiots in the Devil Cult don't think about it. How can something that can break the void and enter this world through summoning be a deity that can bring them eternal life and power? I think it's more likely to be a catastrophe." Lu Chun smiled and did not say anything, but judging from his expression, he obviously had no objection to Lord Tianlan's words. After sneering, Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chun, "By the way, have you seen these 4 objects before?" Lu Chun sat upright on the ground, like a shadow blending into the surrounding darkness. His face could not be seen clearly. After a while, he said calmly, "I have never seen these 4 divine objects in the evil faction." Back then, I also asked Yin Shouyang about this, and he said that this myth and legend has been passed down for thousands of years. Until now, it is difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies. However, these 4 treasures do exist, but it seems that not all of them are in the hands of the evil faction demons. A few of them have already been lost in the world. Until now, there is no hope of finding them. Yes, Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "What you said is similar to what I know. It is basically like this." Lu Chun raised his head slightly and looked at him. He said, "Then what do you plan to do now? And what do you mean by destroying the Tree of God?" Lord Tianlan said, "Actually, after I thought of this, I've already secretly made some arrangements. Of course, it is still early. Roughly speaking, we'll first find 1 or a few of the 4 divine objects, branch, leaf, and seed, and then we'll use these to find the others." Lu Chun suddenly raised his voice as if he was a little surprised. He interrupted and asked, "If you find 1 divine object, you can find other divine objects through it?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and touched his bald head with his hand. Then he said, "I do have some ideas. We can give it a try. You know, when one's cultivation realm reaches my level, he will always think of or understand some strange divine powers. It just so happens that I have a divine power that can divine the whereabouts of other things through the same species. Of course, this divine power is actually not so effective every time, especially for these things that are related to the legendary divine objects. The mysteries of heaven are even more mysterious, and it is easy to make a mistake. But it is still a method after all." Lu Chun paused for a moment and said, "That's amazing. How confident are you?" Lord Tianlan laughed and said, "About 70% to 80%. Lu Chun's pupils suddenly constricted. Fortunately, he could not see clearly in the darkness. After a while, he said in a low voice, "This should be very confident." Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "That is why I want you to come and help me to see if you can find those branches, leaves, and seeds." Just as Lu Chun was about to speak, Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand slightly and stopped him. "I roughly know what you want to say. However, I still think that you're the most suitable person for this matter. After all, it's something that's closely related to the Devil Cult. No one is more familiar with the Devil Cult than you. How about helping me 1 more time?" He stared at Lu Chun and said, "Let's completely eliminate this evil scourge that has been harming the world for thousands of years. Okay?" Lu Chun took a deep breath, and just when he was about to speak, he suddenly hesitated. He felt waves of coldness appear on his forehead and back, and he suddenly realized to his shock that he was actually drenched in sweat unknowingly, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. After a while, Lu Chun suddenly nodded heavily and said in a deep voice, "Okay, I will help you with this. I was right about you." Perfected Lord Tianlan walked to Lu Chun's side with a gratified expression and patted the latter's shoulder gently. "I knew that you wouldn't disappoint me," Perfected Lord Tianlan said in a joyful tone. Lu Chun snorted and said, "You won't make me work for nothing again this time, right?" Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment and said, "When did I make you work for nothing?" I don't think so. That time on the Kunlun Mountain, Lu Chun said indifferently. You called me over and made a bunch of extravagant promises, but you have not fulfilled any of them until now. A trace of embarrassment flashed across Lord Tianlan's old face. Then he smiled bitterly and said, I'm indeed in the wrong for this matter. I'm sorry, but you should also understand that there are things that I can't do either. Back then on the night of the full moon, you suddenly rushed to the Su family at the foot of the mountain and killed them. Then, you immediately escaped and attracted the attention of both the Orthodox and the demon sections. Under such circumstances, I was the new sect leader and needed to reorganize the major forces in the Kunlun party. I really couldn't stand up for you. Lu Chun waved his hand and said, I know. That's why I came back to see you this time. I'll help you with this matter again, but I also want to know how you'll arrange things for me if this matter is done well. At least, I'll have something to worry about. Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chun for a long time and suddenly nodded. You're right. Actually, even if things don't go well for you this time, it's just bad luck and I won't blame you. What I want to tell you is that no matter what, I'll fulfill my promise after this matter is over. As he said that, he suddenly reached out and grabbed one of Lu Chun's palms before stuffing something into his palm. Based on the feeling of the skin on his palm, Lu Chun instinctively felt that it seemed to be a square metal plate. It was hard and a little cold, and its edges were smooth and round. However, the center of the plate was uneven and seemed to be engraved with a word. He rubbed it for a moment and suddenly frowned. Looking at Lord Tianlan, he asked in surprise, What's this? It's the word Tian. One day, you'll inherit this Taoist name from me. Right now, perfected Lord Tianlan's unusually tall and burly body seemed like a tall mountain in the darkness. Even his voice seemed to carry a trace of an ancient aura. Lu Chun, keep it well. This is something that I should have given to you more than 10 years ago. Chapter 391. Something that should have been given more than 10 years ago. What was the meaning of this so-called heavenly token? Everything seemed to be possible to guess, but perfected Lord Tianlan did not continue to explain to Lu Chun, and Lu Chun did not ask further. He just slowly clenched the token in his hand and did not say a word in the darkness. No one could see the expression on his face at the moment, so no one could guess his current mood. The night wind swept past the treetops, making rustling sounds and adding a bit of silence to the world. No one else knew the content of this conversation in the forest in the middle of the night, including Old Ma, who had been staying outside the small forest from the beginning to the end. He was a bit bored, but in fact, he was also a bit worried. He would look at the forest from time to time, but he never had the intention to go in, until he saw Atsu walking out of the darkness in the forest in the night, and then Lu Chen's figure also appeared in his sight. Old Ma immediately went to greet them. When he was about to say something, he suddenly turned his head and looked to the side. Then, with a slightly surprised expression, he asked Lu Chun, Where is perfected Lord Tianlan? He went back first. Lu Chun said that he has something to deal with and has to rush back, so he won't come see you again. He asked me to tell you on his behalf. Oh, Old Ma nodded. He naturally did not dare to be dissatisfied with perfected Lord Tianlan. He said, His Excellency is very busy every day, so of course he is very busy. It doesn't matter. By the way, how did your conversation go? Lu Chun was silent for a moment and said, It went well, but he asked me to stay here in Immortal City to help him. Old Ma immediately looked happy. He patted Lu Chen's shoulder and said with a smile, That's good. Immortal City is the most prosperous place in the world, and you have a perfected Lord of Soul Formation as your backer. If you stay here and work, your life will be too easy. He still wants me to help him deal with the devil cult, Lu Chun said. Old Ma paused for a moment, his brows slightly wrinkled. After a moment, he slowed down his speech, as if he was thinking, said, If that is the case, then it is hard to say. After all, the evil faction side is full of lunatics, but, this seems to be what you've been doing all your life. At least you are much better than others. Lu Chun smiled bitterly and looked at Old Ma helplessly. You also know that this is the only thing I've done in my life. Old Ma shrugged, and then he said, Have you thought it through? Let me know if you've made a decision. I'll return to the immortal city to see the Lord first, and then I'll arrange everything." Lucien opened his mouth to say something, but he suddenly held back. He placed his hand on his chest and pressed lightly. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "All right, then go and ask them what they want us to do." "All right." When the morning sun shone down from the horizon, Lucien was still lying on the ground in the forest, his head resting on the soft fur of Atsu. As the sun gradually rose, the light and shadow in the forest kept changing, shifting. There was a kind of strange and breathtaking beauty. Lucien woke up in the morning light, but did not get up. He only looked at the light and shadow crisscrossing, changing strange scene. Occasionally he would reach out and touch his chest. Under his clothes, there was already a tag hanging on his chest, and there was still a trace of faintly discernible cool air coming from it. He waited until noon before he saw Oldma return, looking at his hurried footsteps, but his expression was considered normal. Lucien then slowly sat up, smiled at Oldma, and said, "You've worked hard. How's the matter?" Oldma sat down in front of him and did not talk nonsense with Lucien. He said straightforwardly, "We don't need to fight and kill this time. The most important task is to find the evil sect's legendary branch, leaf, and seed." Lucien nodded his head and said, "Where do we find it? At least when I was in the evil sect, I didn't really see these divine objects. Now, we have to rely on the two of us to look for it blindly?" After a pause, Lucien said, "If that's really the case, I think the two of us should go back to King Shitang village. At least it might be a little safer there." Oldma laughed and said, "Don't worry, although it's very difficult to find these things. Perfected Immortal has already told me that the most important thing about these divine objects of the same origin is that they are intertwined with each other's fate energy. As long as one of them is found, someone will use other secret techniques to deduce the approximate location of the other divine objects." Lucien raised his eyebrows and said, "There's actually such a powerful supernatural power. Who knows?" Oldma smiled and said, "Anyway, it's all the supernatural power of perfected immortals. It's not strange that we mortals can't compare." Lucien pondered for a moment and said, "Even so, the world is so big, it's really too difficult to find the four treasures that have no clues at all." Before he finished speaking, Oldma interrupted, "Don't be afraid. Perfected Immortal has already told me very clearly this morning. Now in this immortal city, including the land within 100 miles, there's a hidden divine object. We just need to think of a way to find it." Lucien's expression changed and instantly became a little serious. He looked at Oldma and said, "Where did this news come from?" Oldma shook his head and said, "I also heard it from Perfected Immortal. Of course, I don't know the specific source of the news, and it's not convenient for me to ask." Oldma was telling the truth. Lucien nodded slowly, but a trace of uneasiness flashed across his heart. No one knew better than him that at this moment there was a seed of the sacred tree sealed in his body, and it was also very likely that this treasure was one of the four divine objects that he and Oldma had mentioned before. He originally thought that as long as he strictly guarded against this secret would never be known by others. But now it seemed that there was someone else who might know this secret. Or was it just a pure coincidence? He lowered his head and pondered for a long time without saying a word, but Oldma, who was standing at the side, came over and patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't think too much. Anyway, in the end, isn't it just a battle of wits and courage with the demons of the devil cult? We've been doing this for so many years. What's there to be afraid of?" Lucien grunted and nodded. Oldma smiled and said, "Since you also understand this, then let's go. Right now, let's go to the immortal city and find an inn to stay for a couple of days to rest. In the future, should we also make a disguise to avoid being discovered by others?" Lucien glanced at him and said, "What do you want to do?" Oldma coughed and said, "How about the two of us cooperate to open a shop?" "Forget it." Lucien bluntly pointed at his heart and said, "When you do business, it's always a losing business. Every shop you open collapses, you've never made money, and you've even subsidized it every time. If you go to open a shop in the Immortal City, I'm afraid you'll be suppressed by others in 8 to 10 days. Old Ma grunted, but with an arrogant look on his face, he said, "What do you know? We have a backer behind us. If we encounter any trouble, we could just look for the Lord to solve it. And what's more, it's actually just a kind of speculation." As for the actual situation, Lord Immortal also said that he might not be 100% sure. Lu Chun grunted again, feeling that there was no need for him to be entangled on this issue. So he deliberately changed the topic and said, "This time, was it also you and I who directly contacted the damn Baldy?" "That's not it." A burst of laughter, as clear as a wind chime, came from outside the forest. Chapter 392. Lu Chun and Old Ma looked at each other, then turned to look together. At noon, when the sun shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, a slender and beautiful figure walked in from outside the forest. It was a beautiful and mature woman. She had a smile on her face, charming and gentle. She even waved at Lu Chun, then said with a smile, "Lord True Monarch, firstly, he has too many things to deal with every day. Most of the time, he is really too busy. Secondly, he has too big of a target. Even though his Tao is profound and powerful, he really attracts too much attention. If it was somewhere else, it would be fine. But in this immortal city with countless hidden dragons and crouching tigers, it is very easy to attract the attention of other forces." She smiled and said to Lu Chun and Old Ma, "You guys don't want this to happen, do you?" Lu Chun stared at this woman, his brows slightly furrowed. After a moment, he said in a deep voice, "Shuang? Hall Leader Shui?" "That's me." The woman nodded with a smile and said, "I am Shuang, the Hall Leader of the Fuyunji you guys were in before. You can say that I am temporarily helping Lord True Monarch to look after you." Lu Chun's expression became more serious. No matter who it was, as long as they were below the level of Divine Monarch, when facing this woman, whether they were friend or foe, almost all of them would involuntarily feel a kind of reverence mixed with complex emotions. Fuyunji was an organization founded by Lord Tian Lan many years ago. It was affiliated with Zhengxiameng. Influenced by the founder, for many years, Fuyunji had always been one of the most fierce organizations in the righteous path against the Devil Sect. Every year, both sides had to pay a high price for this kind of hatred. And Shuang had also become one of the few enemies of the Devil Sect who had a blood feud with Lord Tianlan. For the past few years, the true Immortal Alliance had been growing stronger day by day. The evil sect had been weakening, and there was almost no stronger external enemy. The world had been peaceful for a long time. For a very long time, there had not been any overly intense and bloody battle. However, even under such circumstances, Shui Ying still became the hall master of the true Immortal Alliance, whose hands were stained with the most blood and lives. It could be said that she was the most eye-catching. In recent years, the devil cult had been on the wane. Although there were often news of devil cult followers in other parts of the Divine Land. But looking at the overall situation, the once powerful devil cult began to go downhill after the crucial battle of the Desolate Valley in the Land of Chaos more than 10 years ago. Lu Chun's original identity was actually a shadow in Fuyunji, but he was a rather special existence. After lurking in the Devil Sect for so many years, there was only one person in the outside world who could directly contact him, and that was Old Ma. And on the surface, Old Ma was just an ordinary member of Fuyunji, but in private, he would directly report to Lord Tianlan about the matter of Lu Chun. And because of this, in the past, Lu Chun did not fawn over this beautiful hall leader like most of the Fuyunji shadows, and Shuang did not seem to understand them. But this situation seemed to have changed today. In the future, if you are in the Immortal City, you can temporarily be considered as one of my subordinates. If there is anything, I will help you ask Lord Tianlan. What do you think? Shuang said very politely, as if they were old friends for many years, discussing with Lu Chun and Old Ma. Lu Chun smiled, nodded and said, "Okay." Shuang laughed, clapped her hands and said, "Then it's settled. you and Old Ma can find a place to rest for the next 2 days. Then I will arrange for you to find a business in the Immortal City as a cover. Things can be carried out slowly. There is no hurry." Speaking up to here, she paused, then smiled and said, "In addition, there is one more thing I want to tell you. Lord Tianlan has already discussed this matter in depth with me, and I know the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Because there are too many mountains in this immortal city, there are many eyes spying on us both in the open and in the dark, so it is indeed not very convenient for Lord Tianlan. So in the future, the two of you better not look for him directly. If there is anything, tell me, okay?" Old Ma frowned slightly and turned to look at Lu Chun, only to find that the other was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other in the air for a moment, then turned away. After a while, Old Ma laughed and cupped his hands to Shuang. "Home Master Shui is right. Then in the future, we brothers will have to ask Home Master to take care of us. You are too polite." Shui Ying's attitude had always been very gentle and polite, but for some reason, there seemed to be an indistinct sense of distance between them. Moreover, when facing the two of them, she seemed to treat them differently. Intentionally or unintentionally, she placed more of her attention on the quiet Lu Chun. It was also at this time that Lu Chun opened his mouth and said to Shuang, "Hall Master Shui, there is something that I need your help with." Shuang nodded and said, "Go ahead." Lu Chun pointed at Atsu, lying on the side, and said, "This dog has been with me for many years. Can it follow me into the city?" Shuang glanced at the huge figure of Atsu and was obviously startled. Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed and then said, "This might be a bit troublesome. Recently in the city, you should know about the dog prohibition order, right?" As she spoke, she raised her head and looked at Lu Chun and Old Ma. Lu Chun and Old Ma both nodded. Lu Chun then said, "I know about that. Old Ma also told me before to let it loose in the mountains around the Immortal City for a period of time. However, this is the Immortal City, not an ordinary place. There are countless experts in the open and in the dark. I'm not at ease." Shuang was obviously still a bit hesitant. After pondering for a moment, she said, "This black dog is too big of a target. It is too eye-catching. If you keep it by your side, and one day it runs out onto the street, I am afraid that in the blink of an eye, you will be in danger of being exposed." Lu Chun interrupted, "Then if we only stay in our residence and don't go out, is that okay?" Shuang thought for a moment and said, "That should be much better. However, the two of you used to be in this line of work. If there is a mistake, the two of you should know what the consequences will be, right?" Lu Chun smiled and did not say anything else. Instead, he lowered his body and stroked Atsu's head. Old Ma did not say a word. Shuang glanced at the two of them and did not say anything else. After chatting with them for a while about future arrangements, she said goodbye and left. However, before she left, she secretly gave Old Ma a look. Old Ma coughed and said to Lu Chun with a smile, "You sit here for a while. I will send home Master Shui off." After saying that, he followed Shui Ying out of the forest. Once they were out of the forest, they immediately felt that their vision was much brighter and their mood was much more cheerful. However, there was not much joy or excitement on Shui Ying's face. At the edge of the forest, she turned to look at Old Ma. Old Ma laughed bitterly in embarrassment. Shui Ying coldly snorted and said, "Old Ma, you are also an old man in Fuyunji. I do not need to lecture you on whether this matter is right or wrong, do I?" Old Ma nodded repeatedly and said, "Hall Master, please calm down. You are indeed in the wrong in this matter. What you said is reasonable." Shui Ying said, "Then why did he insist on bringing that dog along? Logically speaking, this person has been a shadow for more than 10 years. It is impossible for him not to know the rules here. Or is this Lu Chun taking advantage of the Lord True Monarch's high regard for him to purposely give me a hard time?" Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, "There is absolutely no such thing. Hall Master, please do not overthink it." Shui Ying's expression fluctuated. She seemed to be a little cold, but she did not seem to be angry. After a while, she suddenly smiled and said, "Forget it. No matter what, we are all working for the Lord True Monarch. Let us keep in touch in the future." After saying that, she nodded to Old Ma and floated away. Old Ma looked at the graceful and beautiful figure and thought of the bloody legends that had tainted this woman in the past. He then looked back at the forest and could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. He said in a low voice, "They're all troublesome." Chapter 393. This is troublesome. Old Ma looked a little worried and said to Lu Chun, "This is a little troublesome." Lu Chun sat on the ground, one hand casually stroking Atsu's head. Atsu also rested its head on Lu Chun's thigh with a satisfied expression. Its two giant eyes were also half closed, and it occasionally grunted twice, as if it was about to fall asleep. Hearing Old Ma's complaint, Lu Chun looked up at him and smiled. "What's wrong?" Old Ma squatted down beside him, glanced at the huge black dog, and said, "You know what's going on, so I don't have to talk nonsense. We'd better keep a low profile when we enter the Immortal City, but if you insist on bringing Atsu, it's really troublesome." Roar. Suddenly, there was a low roar, and it was aggressive, as if a ferocious demon beast had suddenly jumped out of the forest, which startled Old Ma. But when he took a closer look, there was no movement around him. The one who roared was Atsu, who looked simple and silly just now. This giant dog, which was already taller than an adult man, stared at Old Ma with a fierce look in its eyes. It let out a low growl from its throat, but it looked like it was about to bite Old Ma. The snow-white fangs and the fierce look in Atsu's eyes made Old Ma's heart skip a beat, and he subconsciously took a step back. But at this moment, Lu Chun reached out from the side, and with a smile, he slapped Atsu's head and scolded with a smile, "Don't mess around. Old Ma is one of us." Atsu retracted the fangs that he had just bared just a moment ago. He glared at Old Ma and looked a little unwilling, but he still lay down next to Lu Chun while huffing and puffing. Old Ma heaved a sigh of relief and couldn't help cursing again. "Damn it. I gave you so many meat bones to eat back then, and now you've forgotten all about it." Lu Chun waved his hand and said to Old Ma, "This matter may be a little troublesome, but please take the trouble. The mountains around the Immortal City are not safe. I don't feel at ease leaving Atsu alone outside." Old Ma pondered for a moment and said to Lu Chun, "Actually, it's not difficult for us to bring Atsu into the city and find a bigger house to stay in. I'm just afraid that after a long time, Atsu will be so bored that they can't take it anymore and run out to the streets. That would be troublesome." Lu Chun thought for a moment and suddenly asked Old Ma, "This time, we won't have to pay for the expenses ourselves, right?" Old Ma immediately said, "Of course, no matter what, we are still working for Fuyunji. At least they have to pay for our daily expenses. Well, I still have to talk to Hall Leader Schwell later to see if she can give me more money to open a shop, a storefront, or something. This is our business without any capital." At the end of his speech, Old Ma rubbed his hands excitedly. It seemed that he still cared about doing business and opening a shop. Even if he had failed repeatedly on the road of business in the past 10 years and suffered countless losses, he still had a lot of money. As someone who had experienced that period of time with Old Ma, Lu Chun was very clear about Old Ma's experience and ability in this regard. But since it was not his own money, Lu Chun did not care about it. He just said to Old Ma seriously, "That's good. When you go to ask for money, ask for an extra, a large portion of rations for Atsu." Old Ma was startled and said, "A large portion of rations? What is this for?" Lu Chun touched the smooth fur on Atsu's back and patted its belly. He smiled and said, "This dog is different from ordinary dogs. Believe me, as long as there is enough delicious food, I guarantee that it will be too lazy to take a step out." Old Ma looked at Atsu with some astonishment. He could not help but roll his eyes and said, "Is there such a thing? I say, are you a dog or a pig?" 2 days later, an extremely spacious carriage that could seat 4 to 5 people silently stopped outside the forest. The coachman was a dark, skinny, and capable-looking old man around 50 years of age. He didn't make a sound when he arrived and just parked the carriage without saying a word. Then, he sat in the carriage and waited silently. After a while, Old Ma, Lu Chun, and Atsu walked out of the forest and got on the carriage. From the beginning to the end, the old coachman looked straight ahead and did not look at them. It seemed that he was completely unaware of what was happening behind him. It was not until the sound of Old Ma closing the carriage door was heard that he seemed to suddenly wake up. He also did not look back, but picked up the whip in his hand. With a crack of the whip, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. The carriage turned around and began to walk towards the immortal city in the distance. The carriage was very spacious, and the inside was also clean and tidy. Once the door was closed, it was as if it was isolated from the outside world. There were small windows on both sides of the carriage, but at the same time, there was a curtain so that the people inside the carriage could see the scenery outside, but the people outside the carriage could not see the situation inside the carriage clearly. It was very convenient. After entering the carriage, perhaps because Lu Chun had already told them beforehand, Atsu obediently lay on the wooden plank, while Lu Chun and Old Ma sat opposite each other. The carriage was spacious enough, and they sat comfortably. They heard the sound of the wheels rolling along the way. They gradually moved from the quiet mountains to the road, and as they gradually approached the huge and bustling immortal city, more and more people came and went around the carriage, and there were all kinds of sounds. Listening to the various sounds that came from outside the carriage, Lu Chun suddenly said, "Where are we going?" Old Ma said, "Hall leader Shui has already made arrangements. Through secret means, he found a spacious house for us. It will not attract attention. We will go and stay there first, and then we will move slowly." Lu Chun nodded and said, "After all, this immortal city is Zhengxiameng's territory. It is convenient to do things, and the speed is much faster than other places." Old Ma glanced at him, but shook his head and said, "You are wrong about this." Lu Chun was a little surprised and said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma looked out of the window through the curtain and said, "You rarely come here. Even if you come occasionally, because your identity is hidden, you will not come into contact with the people here in Zhengxiameng. So you do not understand the current situation. Now in this immortal city, Zhengxiameng, there are scenes of overcrowding everywhere. There are all kinds of big and small yamen in the immortal city, and there are countless redundant officials. To do a simple thing, they have to worship a lot of bodhisattvas, make people break their legs, and then accept bribes and money to do things. It is a common practice. Speaking of this, Old Ma smiled thoughtfully and said, "Normally speaking, if we want to buy such a house through ordinary means, and we don't give them money, and we just do things according to the proper rules, let alone 2 days, it will take at least 2 months." Lu Chun frowned and said after a moment of silence, "According to what you said, what if I go to do something and say that it was the damn Baldy who gave me the task? Will those people speed up?" Old Ma hesitated and seemed to be thinking for a moment. Then he said, "With the reputation of a perfected immortal, maybe it can be done faster by 10 days. Lu Chun couldn't help but laugh and said, "The damn Baldy's reputation can only be faster by 10 days? Old Ma also laughed and said, "More or less. These things are too small and too complicated, but there are rules to follow. You, a perfected immortal, can't be too serious with your subordinates. It's embarrassing enough, so it's more or less like this." Lu Chun sighed and said, "Then why can it be so fast this time? It seems that Hall leader Shui seems to be different from others." "Yes, in the Immortal Alliance, Fiyunji is sometimes like an anomaly. He does things quickly, and his level of command is far better than the other halls. But because of this, our hall leader Shuang has also been criticized a lot. People say that she likes to be in the limelight, is arrogant, and flatters perfected immortals, and so on. However, this is what I think about this matter." He raised his head to look at Lu Chun and said indifferently, "A person whose hands are stained with blood will always move faster than those mediocre people, right?" Lu Chun nodded and said, "You are right. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories." Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.